Chapter 841. Since he had agreed to Princess Helen's challenge, Hisu did not beat around the bush. He stood up and walked to the open space in the center. Princess Helen was very happy to see that he was straightforward and followed him. Hisu cupped his hands and said, "Princess, don't go too far." Princess Helen replied with a fierce whip. "You people from the Central Plains talk too much nonsense." The long soft whip mercilessly lashed at Hisu. Hisu was born in the Shadow Guard. As the head of the 4 Shadow Guards by Yi Li's side and the first batch of people personally trained by Yi Li, he also had nearly 10 years of military career. If Princess Helen picked him, Hisu would not need to lead troops to war and could just take off his armor and return home. Hisu did not even use his weapon. He casually sidestepped and dodged Princess Helen's seemingly fierce attack. Princess Helen was a little surprised. Although she was not arrogant enough to think that she could defeat Yi Li's capable general, she did not expect the other party to dodge her whip without even moving. She snorted and said with a smile, "You're really powerful. Let's see how you dodge this." Princess Helen stopped probing and the long whip in her hand rolled toward Hisu like a sky full of poisonous snakes. Hisu took a step back and dodged Princess Helen's whip with his bare hands. The two of them began to exchange blows in the open space in the field. In the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged 50 to 60 moves. Hisu felt that he should give enough face to this princess. With a snort, he directly ignored the shadow of Princess Helen's whip and firmly grabbed the end of the long whip. With a slight shake, Princess Helen's whip fell out of her hand and was put away by Hisu. Everyone present cheered in unison. Hisu put away the long whip and walked up to Princess Helen, saying, "Thank you for letting me win, Princess's whip." Princess Helen looked at him from head to toe. "The general of the Mahist army is indeed powerful. I Helen am convinced." She took the whip and no longer pestered him. She returned to sit beside Yi Li. The northern generals watching the battle could naturally see that Hisu was holding back. On one hand they admired Hisu's kung fu and on the other hand they were even more eager to fight. The young man who had asked Yi Li for help was the first to stand up and challenge Hisu. It was inconvenient to fight with a woman, but it was a different story when fighting with a man. Hisu also very straightforwardly accepted his challenge. The two men began to shout in the open space of the field. Although the people of the northern region generally did not practice internal energy, their external energy and physical strength were far beyond that of the people of the Central Plains. Hisu's interest was also piqued. He decided not to use his internal energy and only use some of the most commonly used martial arts in the army to fight with him. The intensity of the fight between the two men was naturally incomparable to the fight with Princess Helen just now. Their punches and kicks made the blood of the people around them boil and there was a lot of noise. Hisu fought 5 or 6 men of the northern region in a row without showing any signs of weakness. After that, Qin Feng, Lin Han, Zhuojing and the others also entered the field. Their martial arts were not inferior to Hisu's at all. Not only did the northern generals admire them greatly, the Central Plains generals who had surrendered on their side were also very shocked. Even these unknown young generals under Princess Ding were so powerful. How awe-inspiring were those famous generals who had been famous for a long time. They could not help but rejoice in their hearts that they had surrendered to the Prince Ding mansion early. With such strength, how could Ren Qining not be defeated? It had to be said that this was actually a beautiful misunderstanding. Among these 4 people except for Hisu, their ability to lead troops and fight was probably not much better than the generals present. However, their martial arts could definitely be ranked in the top 10 of the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army. Early in the morning, 50 miles northeast of Chongqing City, 300,000 soldiers of the northern region had already headed north under the leadership of the tribal leaders of the northern region. They would come out from there and return to their own familiar land. Counting from the time Ren Qining appeared on the land of the northern region had undergone too many changes in the past decade. They had also been blinded by desire and ambition. Following Ren Qining, they wanted to build a huge empire and build a great undertaking that would last forever. They wanted all the rich land in the world to become the hunting ground for the men of the northern region. However, they had also paid a huge price. In just over a decade from the previous tribal war to the war at the pass and the 2 confrontations with the Mahist army, the population of the northern region had decreased by 60% compared to a decade ago. The number of young men had also decreased by more than 80%. If they continued to be stubborn, what awaited them was only extinction. Therefore they now brought the remaining men back to the place they were familiar with and started a stable life again. Perhaps in another decade or so, the population of the northern region would still be as prosperous as before. Princess Ding, we are leaving. Thank you for this time. I, the northern region, will never forget the great kindness of the Prince Ding mansion. Princess Helan stood on the side of the official road with a horse and said with a sincere smile. Yili smiled faintly and said, Princess, take care. There is still a war in the rear. Forgive me for not being able to see you off. Princess Helan smiled and said, no need to see me off. Your Central Plains is very fun. When the war is over, I will come and play with you. Yili smiled and said, I will be waiting for you at any time. Princess Helan mounted the horse and cupped her hands towards Yili and said, I am leaving. By the way, Princess Ding, that Rinchining is very vengeful and ruthless. After I leave, he will definitely vent his anger on you. You must be careful. Yili nodded and said with a smile, I know. Princess, take care. Princess Helan nodded and turned her horse to chase after the large group in front of her. She heard a sharp whoosh in the distance. Princess Helan turned her head and saw a feather arrow with a cold glint shooting towards her. Princess, be careful. Yili shouted. At the same time she moved her sleeve and a silver light flew out from her sleeve and shot towards the arrow. At the same time Zhuojing and Lin Han, who were beside Yili, jumped up and slashed at the arrow with their swords. Finally the arrow was shot down before it could reach Princess Helan. Princess Helan was not injured, but the horse under her was startled. It neighed and raised its front leg to throw Princess Helan off the horse. On the other side, Qin Feng flew forward and pulled Princess Helan down from the horse's back. He then slapped the horse's body. The majestic horse immediately fell to the ground, but it did not die. It just lay on the ground and shook its head uneasily. Princess Helan was still in shock after being pulled down by Qin Feng. She could not help but exclaim, What's going on? Bitch, give me your life. Before Yili could return to Princess Helan, countless men in black had already surrounded them. Yili glanced at them indifferently and said, It's Rinqining's men. Princess Helan was furious. Her hatred and anger towards Rinqining were no less than Rinqining's towards her. She had originally planned to trap Rinqining once and forget about it. In any case, the Prince Ding mansion would take care of him. She did not have to do anything more and lost the lives of the northern soldiers for no reason. She did not expect that Rinqining would dare to send people to assassinate her. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Princess Helan did not use the whip anymore. She pulled out the dagger at her waist and rushed towards the assassins with a few guards beside her. Yili said to Qin Feng, Don't let anyone hurt Princess Helan. Chapter 842. Qin Feng nodded. With a wave of his hand, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion also rushed forward. The melee between the two sides was not much gentler than a small battle. Rinqining, I know you're here. Come out. Princess Helan slashed at an assassin in black and shouted loudly in all directions. A cold voice rang out not far away. I'll fulfill your wish. Rinqining jumped down from a small hill by the roadside. The long sword in his hand was like a snake as he stared at Princess Helan and shot straight at her. Yisu and Qin Feng flew forward at the same time. Their two long swords struck Rinqining's sword at the same time, blocking Rinqining. Behind him, Lin Han had already pulled Princess Helan to Yili's side. Rinqining glanced at Yisu and Qin Feng in front of him, then looked at Lin Han and Zhuojing who were guarding Yili. He knew that if he didn't deal with these people today, he wouldn't be able to touch a single hair on Princess Helan's head. Without saying anything else, he waved his long sword and charged straight at Qin Feng. Even if Rinqining's martial arts were not the best in the world, he was still one of the best. Back then, Ling Taihan and Lei Zhenting had personally said that Rinqining must be one of the top 10 masters in the world. Although Yisu and Qin Feng's martial arts cultivation were still a little inferior to Rinqining's, the Prince Ding mansion, especially Qilin, was best at fighting together. Back then, a few fledgling Qilin had been able to capture Mu Qingtsong, one of the top 4 masters in the world. Now that Yisu and Qin Feng had joined forces, Rinqining wouldn't be able to escape for a while. Rinqining's fight with Yisu and Qin Feng lasted for more than half a shurchen. Yili looked at Qin Feng and Yisu who were gradually falling behind. She also praised Rinqining in her heart. No matter what kind of person Rinqining was, at least his martial arts were really good. At least he was much stronger than Tan Jiji. Young Master Rin, there won't be any results even if we continue fighting like this. Why don't you listen to this consort and let everyone stop? Yili raised her voice. Rin Qining sneered and his attacks became even fiercer. Yili narrowed her eyes slightly. Young Master Rin, this consort has never been a gentleman. This consort is particular about the rule of not bullying with numbers. The implication was that if Rin Qining insisted on fighting, she didn't care about bullying with numbers. Rin Qining only had a slight advantage over He Su and Qin Feng. If Qin Feng and He Su really fought with their lives on the line, Rin Qining might not be able to escape unscathed. If Shuo Jing and Lin Han were to join in, Rin Qining would definitely lose. After a moment, Rin Qining finally snorted coldly and retreated with a sullen face. The remaining assassins also finally stopped and stood behind Rin Qining. Looking at the sullen man opposite her, Yili smiled faintly and stepped forward. Young Master Rin, I didn't expect to see you again so soon after we parted in Glass City. Hearing this, Rin Qining's expression became even more unsightly. He glanced gloomily at Yili and the others. He pointed his sword at Princess Helan and said, "Hand that slut over. The matter between I and the Prince Ding mansion will be decided on the battlefield." Yili shook her head regretfully. Princess Helan is a friend of the Prince Ding mansion. At least before she leaves the border, the Prince Ding mansion cannot let anyone touch her. If young Master Rin must kill her, you can wait until she returns to the north. At that time I won't be able to do anything and won't be troubled, right? Rin Qining sneered and stared at Yili. Princess Ding means that you must protect this slut? Yili sighed helplessly. I have no choice. Young master, please forgive me. Do you think that I only have these people with me? Rin Qining said gloomily. I must tear this slut into pieces. Enough, surnamed Rin. Princess Helan couldn't endure being scolded by such a slut like Rin Qining. She stepped forward and stood beside Yili. She glared at Rin Qining and said, "Is there anyone more slutty than you in this world? My cousin saved your life, so my uncle married my cousin to you. But you pretended to be pitiful and deceived them. You even killed my cousin. You used the men of the north to fight for you and help you build your country. You turned your back on us and have sinister intentions. You even want to exterminate the north. In the words of you Central Plains people, people like you should be called scum. Trash. Despicable. The hundreds of thousands of heroic spirits of the north who died in vain will not let you go. I curse you to die alone in this life and the next. A lowly person like you still wants to revive your country? Dream on." Yili couldn't help but cover her mouth and hold back the laughter in her heart. Helan's Central Plains language was ordinary, but when it came to scolding people, even 3 Central Plains people couldn't compare to her. Just by looking at Rin Qining's face, which was green, blue and purple, one could see how wonderful her scolding was. Yili coughed softly and said to Princess Helan, "All right, Helan. This place was not a place to fight, not to mention that everyone was so close to each other. If Rin Qining really went crazy with anger, it wouldn't be good if he hurt anyone." Princess Helan still wanted to continue, but for the sake of Yili, she resentfully shut her mouth. Seeing that Rin Qining had calmed down, Yili said, "Young Master Rin, I have no right to intervene in the grievances between you and the north, and I can't say who is right and who is wrong. This consort only wants to ask young master, will killing Princess Helan have any effect on the situation?" Rin Qining was stunned. At this point the North's army had already left. Whether he killed Helan or not, it would have no effect on the situation. At most it would help him vent his anger or give the Prince Ding mansion a slap in the face. But if Yili refused to back down, how much would he have to pay to take Helan's life? Looking back at the hundreds of assassins he brought, only a few were left. Rin Qining's eyes dimmed. Yili continued, "I know that young Master Rin still has an ambush. But young Master Rin should know that I can't just come here with a few guards. To be honest, Princess Helan's life or death has no effect on the Prince Ding mansion, but if young Master Rin insists on making a move, I can only accompany you. The Prince Ding mansion promised to send the people of the north away safely, and they definitely won't go back on their word." Rin Qining was silent for a moment, looked at Yili and sneered, "Princess, aren't you afraid of raising a tiger and inviting calamity if you let them leave now? I was able to persuade them back then. Could it be that they were really deceived by I? If they didn't have their own ambitions, how could they be persuaded by I?" Yili said calmly, "No one can guarantee that there will always be peace and prosperity. At least at this moment, the North doesn't have the heart to fight for the Central Plains. If it weren't for young Master Ren, they would still be fishing and hunting in the White Mountains and Black Waters, and have nothing to do with the Central Plains. I can't exterminate the North for the so-called future, can I? If the Central Plains is always strong and powerful, the foreign races naturally won't dare to have the slightest disrespect. If they are willing to degenerate, even if the North is exterminated today, how can young Master Ren guarantee that there won't be a Western or Eastern region tomorrow? Ren Qining snorted, knowing that he couldn't persuade Yi Li to back down. A woman like Yi Li had her own conclusions long ago, and it was indeed difficult to persuade others. Ren Qining shot an arrow at Princess Helan. You'd better not take a single step in the North for the rest of your life, or I will exhaust my whole life to make you die without a complete corpse. Chapter 843. Princess Helan was not afraid at all and replied with a sneer, "This lady will pray to the great god day and night to let you die early and reincarnate." Seeing that Ren Qining had compromised, Yi Li did not say anything more. She instructed Qin Feng, "Send someone to escort Princess Helan to catch up with the group in front. Also send the princess out of seclusion." Qin Feng nodded silently, "Princess, please." Princess Helan knew that Yi Li was worried that Ren Qining would secretly play tricks, so she let her go first. She made a face at Yi Li, waved her hand and mounted a horse led by a guard behind her. She led her people and rode away. "Princess Ding. See you later." After Princess Helan left, only Yi Li and Ren Qining were left on the side of the road. The two sides were confronting each other. Ren Qining had been angry for the past 2 days, but when he was really angry and faced Yi Li again, he forced himself to calm down. Looking at Yi Li's beautiful face, he sneered, "Princess Ding, good move." Yi Li raised her hand and brushed the hair on her cheek. She smiled faintly and said, "Young Master Ren, you flatter me. I just happened to be here." The veins on Ren Qining's forehead bulged, and his eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. In Ren Qining's ears, Yi Li's words clearly sounded like she was mocking him for being incompetent, which gave her the opportunity to plot against him. He took a deep breath and suppressed the monstrous anger in his heart. Ren Qining glanced at the people around Yi Li and sneered. She sneered and said, "Everyone says that Prince Ding and Princess Ding are inseparable, but why didn't I see Prince Ding fighting this time? Could it be that he looks down on I and disdains to show himself?" "Young Master Ren, why do you ask when you already know the answer? Our prince is now fighting with the northern tribes. Naturally he is not here." Yi Li said, "Besides, although Prince and I are husband and wife, we are not the same person. How can there not be a time when we are separated?" Ren Qining stared at Yi Li, and his smile became more sinister. "I have long heard that Princess Consort is also a god of war. It seems that this time, I will not have the chance to experience the tactics of the war god of the Chu state. I will not have lived in vain to experience Princess Consort's military tactics. But, if Princess Consort is lost again, I want to see if Prince Ding will have the chance to kill my entire family." When he said the last sentence, Qining's words, there was a bloodthirst. In the past 2 years, the conflict between the tribes of the northern region and the old officials of the Central Plains had intensified. It started when Mo Xiuyao sent people to assassinate the queen and the princes of the northern Jin kingdom. It could be said that Ren Qining's defeat today was also the root of the disaster at that time. Perhaps he did not understand at the start, but after thinking about it, even someone as unscrupulous as Ren Qining could not help but tremble with fear at Mo Xiuyao's schemes and calculations. Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled, "How can I let you sacrifice the lives of your entire family? I will take care of myself, and I hope you will too." "I hope so." Ren Qining sneered. "Goodbye." At this time, both sides could be said to have revealed their true intentions, so there was no need to be polite. "I won't see you out," Ren Qining said. Ren Qining watched Yi Li and the rest leave calmly. He stood by the ancient road with his hands behind his back, and no one knew what he was thinking. Seeing him like this, the assassins standing behind him did not dare to disturb him. After a long while, a subordinate who could not wait any longer came to find him. Seeing Ren Qining standing there in a daze, he hurried forward to greet him. "Your Majesty, the Northern Army and gone?" Ren Qining said coldly. "Should I go and chase them back immediately?" "There's no need." Ren Qining shook his head and turned to walk back. He said in a low voice, "Let's go back. We're about to prepare for the battle." In at most 3 to 5 days, Leng Huai's troops at Bauhinia Pass will definitely arrive. The general following behind him was shocked. If that is the case, won't we be pincered by the Mahist army? Your Majesty, shouldn't we retreat first? Ren Qining looked back and asked calmly, where should we retreat to? Behind us is Bauhinia Pass. If we go north, even if we break through Yili's blockade, do you think the northern army will bite back at us at this time? The general behind him could not help but change expression. After thinking for a bit, he broke out in a cold sweat. Your Majesty, then what should we do? What should we do? Ren Qining walked at the front, his footsteps steady. But no one saw the trace of confusion that flashed across his face. I also want to know what to do. The area outside Bauhinia Pass had been vast and sparsely populated since ancient times. There were not even many decent cities. In this kind of place, there was no need to pay attention to the art of war or the terrain when fighting. The terrain was flat, and all the soldiers and horses had nowhere to hide in broad daylight. But no matter how weak Ren Qining's troops were, they still had millions of troops. As the saying goes, enough ants can bite an elephant to death. Leng Huai's Mahist army of more than 200,000 and Yi Li's troops that surrendered only had about 500,000. For a time, the two armies were in a deadlock outside Bauhinia Pass. A few days later, the Mahist army sent out an edict personally written by Princess Ding, saying that the people were innocent. The Mahist army in the north was fighting with the barbarians in the north, and they were unwilling to act rashly against their own people. As long as the soldiers of the northern army were willing to surrender, everything would be forgotten. If they were still willing to join the army, they could join the Mahist army. If they were not willing, they could disarm and return to their fields. On the other hand, the news that Ren Qining was not an orphan of the previous dynasty came out of nowhere. There were also a few old officials under Ren Qining who personally testified. Hence, not only were the ordinary soldiers in the lower ranks divided, but even the generals under Ren Qining who were originally trusted started to waver in their hearts. In the northern army camp, there were soldiers escaping every day. What's more, he directly surrendered to the enemy on the battlefield. No matter how severe Qining's punishment was, it was still not enough. On the 15th of August, the two armies once again faced off 10 miles outside Chongqing city. Leng Huai, who originally split into two groups, also led his troops to meet up with Yi Li and He Su. Ren Qining, who originally had millions of troops, was now left with less than 200,000 troops. Their morale was low and their appearance was disorderly. They could not be compared to the Mahist army behind Yi Li and the others who were all dressed in black. Everyone knew that today was the last battle. Ren Qining was wearing a bright yellow dragon robe, riding on a chestnut horse. He looked coldly at Yi Li and the others on the opposite side. He seemed to be losing but not losing. After a moment of silence, Ren Qining pulled out his sword and pointed at Yi Li. He said in a deep voice, Princess Ding, I's defeat today was not because of the war, but because the heavens failed me. If it was only about marching and fighting, there was really nothing to say these days. Originally, Ren Qining with millions of troops should not have been defeated so quickly. Unfortunately, Ren Qining did not have any advantage at all. How could he not be defeated? How could he be convinced if he was defeated? Before Yi Li could speak, Leng Haoyu, who was following behind him, sneered, The heavens help those who achieve Tao. If you don't fail the heavens, how will the heavens fail you? Ren Qining's face sank and he did not say anything more. In that case, Princess Ding, can we fight? Leng Huai, who was on the right side of Yi Li, patted his horse and said coldly, There is no need for the princess to fight. I want to see the Northern Region King's martial arts. Chapter 844. Ren Qining smiled disdainfully and said, Old General Leng, you're old. Why don't you retire at home? I don't want to bully you because you're old and weak. Leng Huai was so angry that his face turned green. With a roar, he raised his sword and rushed towards Ren Qining. Seeing him like this, Ren Qining didn't hold back. He waved his sword and slashed back. Everyone watched Leng Huai and Ren Qining fight and didn't go forward to help. However, Leng Haoyu frowned slightly as he stared at the two people fighting. The long sword in his hand had already been unsheathed. Yi Li sighed in a low voice. Old General Leng is no match for Ren Qining. Leng, go and help. Although Ren Qining's martial arts were brilliant, he couldn't do anything if Qin Feng and the others swarmed him. Yi Li had never liked the monotonous one-on-one practice before fighting. However, Leng Huai had a grudge against Ren Qining for his son's death. Leng Huai was no longer young. Previously he had forced himself to guard Zijing Pass and the Chu capital for a few months, so his vitality was greatly damaged. He still refused to rest and led the troops to guard the Purple Thorn Pass in order to avenge his beloved son. Yili naturally couldn't disappoint Leng Huai. Leng Haoyu had been worried about Leng Huai's safety for a long time. As soon as Yili spoke, he immediately rushed over. With a swing of his sword, he blocked Ren Qining's sword that was stabbing towards Leng Huai. Ren Qining sneered, "One died, but there's still a good son." Without another word, 3 consecutive swords came towards Leng Huai. Leng Haoyu's long sword danced out a sword net, blocking Ren Qining's sword. Qin Feng whispered beside Yili, "Princess, Leng Er and General Leng are no match for Ren Qining." Ren Qining's martial arts were not only among the top 10 in the world, but at least among the top 5. Compared to Ling Taihan and Lei Zhenting, he only lacked time and experience. As for a natural-born freak like Imo Shuyao, he naturally couldn't compare. However, Leng Haoyu's martial arts could only be considered good. Compared to a general like Leng Huai, it was unknown how much stronger he was. Yili said indifferently, "Don't worry about them. Do it. We must end this battle today." Suddenly, the sound of war drums could be heard on the battlefield. The Mahist army behind Yili roared in unison as they charged towards the army of the northern region. Over the past few days, the northern region army had either fled or surrendered. Only these few people were left, and they were already frightened out of their wits. When they saw the Mahist army charging over like a black tide, they were on the verge of collapsing. In the chaos, Ren Qining, Leng Huai and Leng Haoyu gradually moved to a place with fewer people. In the end, it was Ren Qining who impatiently swept Leng Huai to the ground with his sword. He was seriously injured. "Father." Leng Haoyu's expression changed. He swung his sword at Ren Qining a few times. Behind him, Yili, Qin Feng and the others also followed. Qin Feng saw that Leng Huai was seriously injured and Leng Haoyu was also injured. Without saying a word, he directly drew his sword and stood up straight. Behind him, Zhuojing also joined the battle. Yili then called people to send Leng Huai away to treat his injuries. Ren Qining had been fighting hard for days. At this time he was facing Leng Haoyu, Qin Feng and Zhuojing at the same time. Gradually he began to show a trace of exhaustion. Qin Feng saw a flaw and mercilessly stabbed his sword diagonally across his chest. Ren Qining's face turned pale, and a trace of scarlet overflowed from the corner of his mouth. With a swing of his sword he pushed the 3 people away and leaped forward. Seeing that he was about to escape, everyone hurriedly chased after him. Outside Chongqing City by a quiet lake, Ren Qining, dressed in a bright yellow dragon robe, sat quietly, looking at the small city standing not far away. He had been busy for half of his life and used all kinds of methods to repay his kindness. What he got was only that small city and the incomplete half of the palace. So tired, Qilin had never failed when he made a move. Qin Feng's sword seemed to have missed, but in fact, it was just that he wouldn't die for a while. It was just a little better than dying immediately. Ren Qining tapped a few acupoints, but the blood was still flowing out of the wound. He simply didn't bother to care about it. He casually inserted his sword into the ground beside him, sat alone by the lake and let out a long sigh of relief. After a while, Yili and the others followed. Seeing the figure by the lake, Yili raised her hand to stop everyone and walked forward alone. Qin Feng and Zhuojing exchanged glances. They each took a position and stared vigilantly at the bright yellow figure. Hearing the footsteps behind him, Ren Qining turned around and saw Yili. He smiled faintly and said, "You're here. If you didn't come, I might not have been able to wait for you." Yili looked down and saw that the ground under him was stained red with blood. His face was as pale as paper and he didn't have the vigor he had when he fought with the people on the battlefield. "Northern Region King, do you have something to say?" Yili asked with a lowered eyebrow. Ren Qining waved his hand indifferently and said, "You can call me Ren Qining. It's a name that has been with me my whole life. I'm too lazy to change it." Before he died, he didn't care about the title of Northern Region King or Lin Yuan's identity. In fact, only the name Ren Qining had been with him his whole life. The other 2 names were probably just what he wanted. Yili changed her words and said, "Young Master Ren, do you have something to say?" Ren Qining said faintly, "I don't have anything to say. It's just that I'm about to die. I don't want to die alone." It's a pity that I can't fight with Princess. Yili said, I'm afraid that my insignificant skills won't be able to enter young Master Ren's eyes. Ren Qining looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, actually, I seriously thought about whether I should risk my life to kill you. Whenever I think about Emo Shuyao's expression when he hears about your death, I feel very happy. Yili raised her eyebrows and said, if that's the case, why didn't young Master Ren do it before? Ren Qining shook his head and sighed, I don't have the confidence to kill you. Moreover, thinking about it now, it's very boring. Even if Emo Shuyao is heartbroken, it won't do me any good. Although many people think that I've done so many things, it's very funny. But I always feel that Princess won't laugh at me. There's nothing funny about people who work hard for their beliefs, even if their beliefs are wrong in the eyes of the world. Moreover, who can understand what's right and wrong in this world? Yili said lightly. Well said. Ren Qining smiled and said, so, it's wrong? Yili looked down and said, if young Master Ren feels that it's not wrong, then it's not wrong. Ren Qining weakly supported himself with his sword and muttered in a low voice, yes, if I feel that it's not wrong, then it's not wrong. If it's wrong, then my life, what is it? Scenes from when he was young slowly flowed through his eyes. Since he was young, he had been entrusted with a heavy responsibility. He was the only descendant of the Lin family, the only hope for the previous dynasty to restore the country. Children of the same age, when others were acting spoiled in their parents' arms, he was in the study with his teacher to study the classics of governing the country. When others were playing, he was learning strategy and tactics. When others were sleeping soundly in their beds, he had to wake up early to practice martial arts, training in the winter and the hot summer. It was a pity that he wasn't a genius like Emo Shuyao. Now that he had fallen to such a state, it could only be said that this was his fate. But did anyone ask him what he wanted to do in this life? Have you ever done anything that you want to do? Chapter 845. A pair of beautiful and energetic eyes flashed past his eyes. At that time he had just turned 20 years old, but as a young man he met an innocent and intelligent girl who had never seen the world. She had saved his life, and in his spare time while he was recuperating, he had picked wildflowers and woven them into a garland for her. Her beautiful face was dyed with a faint red glow, and she was more moving than any woman he had ever seen. Then he married her and she gave birth to children for him. If he wasn't Lin Yuan, if he didn't have those responsibilities. Yili silently watched the blood-stained sword cut across his neck. The long sword fell to the ground with a clang, and the man in the dragon robe slowly fell down. Yili remembered that she had lived with Princess Helan for a while. She remembered that her cousin, the princess of the northern region and the former queen of Ren Qining, was called the Bright Pearl. Princess Leng Haoyu and the others came forward and glanced at the person on the ground. Leng Haoyu couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect that he would actually. Yili sighed softly and said, give him a proper burial. He can be considered a formidable person. He will be posthumously conferred the title of Prince Chongqing, and be buried together with the queen of the northern region. Zhuojing hesitated for a moment before saying, Princess, the ashes of the queen of the northern region and several princesses and princes have been brought back to the northern region by Princess Helan. Yili thought for a moment. Set up a cenotaph for him. Send someone to send the ashes to the northern region. Let Princess Helan do as she pleases. After saying that, Yili, who was somewhat dispirited, no longer looked at the person on the ground and turned back to the camp. It is 50. It is time to go back. Let Princess Helan do as she pleases? Zhuojing smacked his lips. With Queen Helan's hatred for Ren Qining, she would scatter his ashes on the road and let people trample on them. After a while, someone came to see Ren Qining's body and took it away. The lakeside regained its tranquility. After a long time, a blue-clothed man appeared at the lakeside. He stared at the dark red bloodstains on the ground for a long time before reaching out to pick up the sword on the ground. He lifted up the hem of his robe and sliced open the sword. The blue-clothed man slowly wiped the dried blood on the sword and softly sighed. I really didn't expect that you would actually. I originally thought that there would be a battle between you and me, but it turned out that I hadn't even seen you seriously. The blue-clothed man casually threw away the cloth in his hand, flicked his sleeves and left. The blood-stained blue cloth fluttered in the breeze and was blown into the rippling lake. It was slowly soaked and blood slowly spread out in the lake. In the Mahist army's tent, Yili raised her head to look at the blue-clothed man in front of her. Her gaze paused on the sword in his hand for a moment before she asked, "What are your plans?" Tan Jiji smiled indifferently and said, "If Wang Fei intends to continue to lock me up, it doesn't matter. If Wang Fei doesn't have this intention, then I want to leave." Yili raised an eyebrow and said with a faint smile, "Where are you going? Are you going to find a new place to start again?" Tan Jiji shook his head and said, "Maybe I'll walk around or go to the western regions or go out to sea." Yili looked at him with interest and said, "What about your ambitions? You don't want it anymore?" Tan Jiji said with a bitter smile, "With Prince Ding and Wang Fei here, no one else can interfere with my ambitions. This one still has some self-awareness. King hasn't. I originally didn't understand, but now I feel that it doesn't matter anymore. Two people, the same name, the same mission and responsibility, but different experiences and different solutions." Seeing Ren Qining end up like this, Tan Jiji, who had always felt that he hated him deeply, felt a bit more sympathy for him. His original ambitions also became a bit more dull. "The winds and clouds of the world come from my generation. Once I enter the Jianghu, time passes quickly. Talking and laughing about the ambitions of the emperor is not better than drinking in the mortal world," Yili softly said. Tan Jiji was slightly lost in thought, but then he smiled and nodded in praise. Wang Fei's temperament, such insight. Tan Jiji is ashamed. From now on there is only Tan Jiji, there is no Lin Yuan. Wang Fei, this one will take his leave. Yili looked at him. "Don't you plan to go back and see Dr. Lin?" Tan Jiji shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Forget it. Father probably doesn't want to see an unfilial son like me. In the future please take care of me, Wang Fei." Yili nodded and said, "Fine, you decide." Tan Jiji didn't say anything else and cupped his hands. "Goodbye. I won't see you out." Seeing Tan Jiji leave, Qin Feng, who was behind Yili, whispered, "Wang Fei, are we really letting him go here? If he has any other ideas, it will be troublesome." Yili shook her head and said, "Tan Jiji is a smart person. He knows that he can't do anything, so he won't be obsessed with this. But if he does anything else, there is no need to ask, just kill him." Qin Feng nodded. Tan Jiji was alone and had offended Mo Jingli. It wouldn't be easy for him to do anything. Wang Fei, Tan Jiji and Ren Qining, who is the orphan of the previous dynasty? Qin Feng asked curiously. Yili lightly shook her head and said with a smile, "I don't know. Who is and who isn't, what's the point?" Qin Feng thought for a moment and nodded with a smile. Wang Fei is right. Who really cared who was and who wasn't? If they were ambitious, even if they killed Tan Jiji, there would be a third and fourth Lin Yuan, Wang Yuan, Zhao Yuan. Chapter 846. Princess Ding Yili had defeated the Northern Territory King Ren Qining within a month. In 2 months she had completely pacified the entire northeast region. The border with the Northern Territory Brute tribe had returned to where it was in the Dechu state. However, the returned territory and people were no longer citizens of the Dechu state. Instead, they were now under the king's manor. Even though the rulers of large countries like Great Chu, Xiling, and northern tribes could see that the foundation of the north was not stable and that there were many hidden dangers within, but there were still millions of people. Ding Wang Fei was able to pacify them in less than 3 months. It was shocking. From then on, Princess Ding Yili's achievements in the field of martial prowess did not belong to any of the past generals. The people below the Prince Ding mansion and outside the newly pacified Purple Thorns Pass revered Princess Ding like a god. In the western tombs genome of Gojoseon Palace, Lei Jinting was studying the map on the table with his head lowered. Ever since Infinite Boundless Mountain and Mo Jingli had gotten together, Mo Jingli had actually begun to vaguely show signs of provocation towards the western tomb. Infinite Boundless Mountain did indeed have some ability. In a few confrontations they had caused Lei Jinting to suffer a few small losses. This had also strengthened Lei Jinting's determination to destroy Infinite Boundless Mountain. Below him, young Master Qingshan was sitting peacefully in his white robes. Even though Infinite Boundless Mountain was hidden deep within the mountains and had a natural formation as cover, young Master Qingshan's face did not have the slightest trace of worry. He was just leisurely sipping his tea, waiting for Lei Jinting's reaction. Father. Lei Tingfeng hurried in with a letter in his hand. Lei Jinting could not help but frown. In terms of age, Lei Tingfeng was about the same as Su Qingshan and Mo Xiuyao. However, not to mention their strategies and methods, their personalities were far from being as calm and collected as these two. It was no wonder that Enchanting had always been worried about his only son. In fact, Enchanting's ability and strategy might not be as good as Emo Xiuyao and Su Qingchen, but he definitely wasn't any worse than people like Emo Jingli and Ren Qining. It was just that he was always under his father's shadow and lacked experience, so his personality was slightly lacking compared to others. Young Master Qingchen is still here. How can you make such a big fuss? What happened? Enchanting asked in a deep voice. Lei Tingfeng also saw Su Qingchen sitting at the side as soon as he entered the room. He was stunned and secretly regretted his rashness just now. However, being scolded by his father in front of Su Qingchen, his expression turned ugly. Su Qingchen put down the teacup and said with a smile, "Since Duke Rue is here, there must be something important. I will take my leave first." Glancing at the letter in Lei Tingfeng's hands, Enchanting could roughly guess what it was about. He shook his head and said, "Young Master Qingchen is not an outsider. Just say it." Lei Tingfeng hesitated for a moment before handing the letter to Enchanting. Princess Ding destroyed Ren Qining's million-strong army. Ren Qining committed suicide. What? Even someone like Enchanting, who had been through many storms, couldn't help but be stunned. He couldn't blame his son for losing his composure just now. Originally, while Enchanting didn't think highly of the alliance between the northern tribes and the northern territories, he was still happy to see it happen. After all, while he was cooperating with the Prince Ding Mansion to deal with Infinite Boundless Mountain, he also had to guard against any sneak attacks from the Prince Ding Mansion. With the northern territories holding them back, he was much more at ease. But who would have thought that just a mere Yili would be able to destroy the northern territories in just 2 months? Emo Xiuyao hadn't even had to lift a finger. Was it the Prince Ding Mansion that was too strong or the northern territories that were too weak? Thinking of this, Enchanting's expression as he looked at Su Qingchen also changed somewhat. Su Qingchen, however, seemed oblivious to it, her expression indifferent. Enchanting calmed himself down before smiling at Su Qingchen. Princess Ding is indeed a female hero of her generation. I must congratulate young Master Qingchen and the Prince Ding Mansion. Su Qingchen smiled mildly. While stabilizing the northern territories could be considered a stroke of good luck that couldn't be replicated, Su Qingchen was still extremely happy that his cousin had successfully accomplished such a great thing. Nodding with a slight smile, she said, "Many thanks to Prince. Lear is still young. It is also her luck that she was able to achieve such a feat by accident." Beside them, Lei Tingfeng's mouth couldn't help but twitch upon hearing this. Princess Ding had only been famous for less than 10 years. Guarding the Eternal Forest, suppressing the Northwest, sweeping through the Western Tomb and now stabilizing the Northern Territories. Even his royal father had suffered a loss at her hands. Such a person was still young. When she was no longer young, how could she still live? Su Qingchen probably also felt that such humble words sounded more like bragging to others. Naturally, she changed the topic with a smile. "The matters of the Northern Territories are far away. Let's not bother about them. Instead, let's talk about how we should deal with Infinite Boundless Mountain. If our two families can't even take down Infinite Boundless Mountain, this Su will really have no face to return to Glass City." Enchanting's and Lei Tingfeng's expressions also brightened. The Northern Territories was already a foregone conclusion. There was no point in dwelling on it. It was just that the borders of the Northern Territories would have to be carefully rearranged. However, before their eyes, if it were the tens of thousands of mighty soldiers of Zhennan Palace as well as the wise young Master Qingchen, they wouldn't be able to take down a mere Infinite Boundless Mountain. That Ren Qining wasn't the #1 joke under the heavens. They were. Moreover, Mo Jingli relied on Infinite Boundless Mountain's support to provoke them time and time again at the Cloud Mist River. Enchanting definitely wouldn't be able to tolerate this. Now that Infinite Boundless Mountain was not destroyed, the Prince Ding Mansion would only lose some face. To the Western Tomb, it was already a great enemy. Enchanting nodded. Young Master Qingchen's words make sense. I wonder if young Master Qingchen has any thoughts on the natural grand formation within the Infinite Boundless Mountain range? Su Qingchen frowned. Although I have already seen the map, it is still incomplete at the end of the day. I however have some thoughts. However, I need to personally head to Infinite Boundless Mountain in order to verify them. Enchanting said, "There have been some small matters by the Cloud Mist River recently. I cannot accompany young Master there. Quan Er will lead 50,000 elite soldiers to accompany young master to infinite boundless mountain. What does young master think? Su Qingchen nodded, cupping his hands towards Lei Tingfeng, smiling. Then I will have to trouble Duke Rui. Lei Tingfeng hurriedly returned the greeting. It is my duty. Young master Qingchen need not mind it. After sending Su Qingchen off, Lei Zhenting and his son were speechless for a long time in the study. Lei Tingfeng asked somewhat worriedly, Father, are we just going to leave the matters of the northern territories to their own devices? Lei Zhenting smiled bitterly. How are we going to manage it? The northern territories have nothing to do with our western tomb in the first place. Also, it was the northern territories themselves who first provoked the Prince Ding mansion. Even if they were to perish, they would only be seeking their own deaths. It's just that, even I did not expect that this Yili would actually be so. Lei Tingfeng could not help but sigh in admiration. Princess Ding is truly not something that any woman in this world can compare to. Even those few from infinite boundless mountain are probably worlds apart when compared to Princess Ding. Lei Zhenting looked at the letter that Lei Tingfeng had presented to him. Princess Ding has conferred upon Ren Qining the title of Duke of Chongqing. Such grace. Back in the Western Tomb, Ren Qining had plotted to assassinate Yi Li, which had also directly led to the Western Tomb's nobles being massacred by Mo Xiuyao until rivers of blood flowed. For such a person, it was already rather good that Yi Li had not seen his corpse torn apart and tossed into the wilderness. She had actually conferred upon him the title of Duke and given him a noble burial. Chapter 847. Even though Ding Wangfei is a woman, she already has the heart and bearing of a man who can turn the clouds with one hand and look down on the world. Lei Zhenting sighed softly. The father and son sighed again and again. In the end, they could only sigh at Mo Xiuyao's good fortune. Jiangnan, Dechu State in the regent's mansion. When Mo Jingli received the news, he was not as calm as Lei Zhenting and his son. With a wave of his hand, he swept the things on the desk to the ground. He clutched the letter in his hand so tightly that the veins on the back of his hand popped out. Yi, what a good Yi Li. No matter how much power he had now, Mo Jingli felt extremely unwilling at all times. Perhaps he had understood a long time ago that abandoning that woman back then was his greatest loss and regret in this life. And now, every inch of the Prince Ding mansion's achievements seemed to indicate his incompetence. The news that Yi Li had pacified the north was even more like a mockery to him. What are you making a fuss about? Dong Fengyu appeared at the door of the study. She had taken off her snow-white clothes and put on the beautiful clothes of the regent's consort. Dong Fengyu's originally beautiful face was now even more graceful and luxurious. Just by looking at the cold and seemingly mocking gaze that she was looking at Mo Jingli with, one would not think that they were a newlywed couple. Mo Jingli's face darkened. He said unhappily, "What are you doing here?" Dong Fengyu ignored his expression. She calmly stepped into the study, crossed the messy floor and stood in front of Mo Jingli. She said with a smile that was not a smile, "Are you angry because the Prince Ding mansion and Yi Li destroyed Ren Qining?" Mo Jingli snorted softly and said mockingly, "The infinite boundless mountains news is indeed fast." Dong Fengyu raised her eyebrows, saying, "The infinite boundless mountains news is naturally fast. What's so strange about that? I already knew about this news 10 days ago." Mo Jingli's expression changed. He grabbed Dong Fengyu and said, 10 days ago? Why don't you say it?" Dong Fengyu slapped his hand away casually and laughed disdainfully. "Why should I say it? Do you think that you can control the infinite boundless mountain just because I married you? Mo Jingli, you think too highly of yourself. My master agreed to assist you because he had no other choice. Why don't you take a look at what kind of material you are?" Mo Jingli's face contorted as he was mocked by his own wife. He pushed Dong Fengyu away and scolded angrily, "Slut." Dong Fengyu interrupted him unceremoniously. "My master told me to tell you, don't always make your own decisions. Why don't you take a look at your current strength? If you really provoke Lei Zhenting, you won't be able to bear the consequences." With that, Dong Fengyu turned and walked out of the door, ignoring Mo Jingli's expression. Mo Jingli stared coldly at Dong Fengyu's back as she disappeared through the door. He clenched his teeth, saying, "Dong Feng, you." No matter how much Mo Jingli clenched his teeth, he was still unable to change the fact that he was currently unable to touch Dong Fengyu. When he had planned to marry Dongfang Yu back then, he had only wanted the power of the infinite boundless mountain. Now that he had it, he also understood why Emo Shuyao had been so dismissive of the infinite boundless mountain's power. Why had the always ambitious Lei Zhenting not interfered in the affairs of the infinite boundless mountain from the start? That's right, the infinite boundless mountain's power was indeed shocking. With the help of the infinite boundless mountain's power, the Dechu state's power had increased greatly in just a few short months. Even if they were to clash with Lei Zhenting now, they might still be able to put up a fight. But at the same time, he was also restricted by the infinite boundless mountain. Many of his decisions had to be approved by Dongfang Hui, and Dongfang Yu was even more hateful towards him, finding fault with him everywhere. The dignified regent of the Dechu state was actually restricted by 2 women. Such humiliation, no matter how great his power was, could not make up for the anger in Emo Jingli's heart. Just as everyone was discussing, Yili had already finished dealing with the affairs of Chongqing City. She threw the rest of the trivial matters to Leng Huai and Leng Haoyu, and brought Xue Jing and the others into the pass, heading towards the Mahist army camp where Emo Shuyao was. Emo Shuyao had long been waiting outside the door. When he saw Yi Li and the others riding over, he immediately flew up to welcome them, landing on Yi Li's horse. Yi Li's horse was also a Fergana horse that was 1 in 10,000. Even when a person landed on it, it did not panic in the slightest and continued to walk forward steadily. Emo Shuyao sat behind Yi Li, one hand around her waist, the other holding the reins. The horse whinnied and turned to run in another direction. Qin Feng, Xue Jing and the others looked at each other, not knowing whether to chase or not. A moment later, Qin Feng shook his head and said, "Let's go back first. With the prince and the princess together, nothing will happen." The prince clearly wanted to be alone with the princess. If they did not know what was good for them and followed, wouldn't the prince remember them in his heart? Who knew when they would be in big trouble? The others also felt that this was very reasonable, and they rode their horses in the direction of the camp. When the time came, the generals who were waiting outside the camp to welcome the princess' return were left waiting for nothing. They looked at each other and could only rub their noses and go back. Emo Shuyao and Yi Li rode the same horse. After a while, Emo Shuyao did not pay attention to it. He allowed it to roam on its own and even stopped to nibble on the grass on the ground. Emo Shuyao only pulled Yi Li into his arms, his chin resting on her shoulder as he rubbed intimately. "Princess Li, you finally came back. I missed you so much." Yi Li helplessly turned her head and kissed his face. She leaned into his arms and said softly, "I also missed you." Emo Shuyao's eyes lit up. He lifted her small chin and stared at those warm and red lips as he fiercely kissed her. "Princess Li, Shuyao, don't make a fuss." Yi Li was frightened by his sudden passion. Emo Shuyao was not willing to stop. He raised a hand to hold the back of her head and deepened the kiss. Yi Li was helpless. She sighed inside and raised a hand to wrap around his neck. She also sank into an intimate entanglement. Emo Shuyao hugged Yi Li and leaned to the side. The two of them immediately fell off the back of the horse. Yi Li reflexively hugged Emo Shuyao. The two of them landed on the grass and rolled a long way before they stopped. Emo Shuyao looked down at the blushing face below him and planted a series of lingering kisses. He buried his head in Yi Li's hair and laughed softly. Princess Li, silver and black hair tangled together. It was exceptionally eye-catching, but it also seemed like they were meant to be tangled together. Yi Li smiled and said softly, "Shuyao, I'm back." Emo Shuyao helped Yi Li up and the two of them sat side by side on the grass. It turned out that Yi Li's horse had been strolling casually and had arrived at a call not far away. The two of them sat on the call and looked down. From afar they could see the Northern Tribe's army camp. Princess Li managed to pacify the northern region in a short 2 months. Your husband, on the other hand, has not made any progress in these 2 months. I'm so ashamed. Emo Shuyao looked at Yi Li and laughed mockingly. Yi Li reached out and pinched his handsome face. She smiled and said, "Take the northern tribes and the northern region as an example. Why didn't Yelu Yi fight you to the death?" Although they were two different countries, the difference between the northern tribes and the northern region was like the difference between clouds and mud. The northern tribes had been established for hundreds of years. Every dynasty had invaded the Central Plains. Although they had never truly attacked the Central Plains, the northern tribes were the biggest threat to the Central Plains. Moreover, the climate of the northern tribes was harsh and the people were valiant. Their martial spirit was much stronger than that of the northern region. It could be said that although Yelu Yi had formed an alliance with the northern region, he had only treated Ren Qining as a pawn to contain the Mahist army. He had never treated him as an equal. Chapter 848. Emo Xiuyao gently rubbed his face against Yi Li's and smiled. He doesn't want to fight me to the death, he only wants my life. Yelu Yi still wanted to return to the northern tribes to fight for the position of king of the northern tribes for Yelu Hong. Why would he fight Emo Xiuyao to the death? Unfortunately, in this world there were many people who wanted Emo Xiuyao's life, but Emo Xiuyao was still alive and the more he lived the better. Yelu Hong and Princess Rong Hua have already returned? Yi Li asked. Emo Xiuyao nodded. That's right, but Helianjin has already arrived. He even brought 800,000 men with him. Right now there are at least 1,300,000 men in the northern tribes camp. So many. Yi Li frowned slightly. No wonder Emo Xiuyao had been talking for so long but had not made any progress. Not to mention the soldiers and horses that the Prince Ding mansion had taken back from the Dechu state. The Mahist army's elite soldiers numbered less than 1 million, and they also had to guard the various places. In terms of soldiers and horses, they could not compete with the northern tribes. Emo Xiuyao smiled coldly, the more the better. I promised Yelu Hong that I would not touch the northern tribes' foundations, but since they came here of their own accord, they can forget about going back. Seeing the killing intent that flashed across Emo Xiuyao's face, Yi Li tenderly kissed his cold cheeks and said softly, "Don't worry, we will avenge Big Brother." Emo Xiuyao nodded. "Li, thank you." The two led their horses down the hill. At the foot of the hill there was a small village. There were very few people in the small village. The villagers' eyes were dim and they were as thin as bones. Their ragged clothes were unbearable to look at. Yi Li couldn't help but feel a lump in her throat when she thought of how the people under the rule of the Northwest Prince Ding mansion lived in peace and contentment, and then looked at these exhausted and despairing people. Seeing her staring at those people in a daze, Emo Xiuyao could not help but sigh softly. He pulled her into his arms and promised in a low voice, "We will definitely get rid of the northern tribes as soon as possible." Yi Li was a little puzzled as she asked, "Why are these people not leaving this place?" Emo Xiuyao shook his head. "Where can we go if we leave this place?" Even though the Prince Ding mansion was able to accommodate them, many of them starved to death on their journey. Besides, the Northwest was too small to accommodate so many people. Which part of the world isn't in chaos? Even if they fled to the South was not peaceful either. There were also many elderly women and children. Firstly, it was difficult to leave their homeland, and secondly, they did not have the ability to travel so far. This village was the same. If the young people did not join the army, they would have fled. Those left behind were the elderly who could not leave and the young and helpless children. They were already considered lucky. More than half of the people in the north had already been killed when the northern tribes invaded the Great Pass. Villages like this are everywhere. Saying this, Emo Xiuyao could not help but feel sad. When the northern tribes invaded the Dechu state, he was planning to attack Xiling naturally. There were no soldiers in the northwest to help the Dechu state resist the northern tribes. Even though the Prince Ding mansion had severed all ties with the Dechu state at that time, they had not done anything wrong in terms of reputation. But facing these worried and numb people, Emo Xiuyao's heart was not made of iron. He could not help but feel a trace of guilt. Are the two of you His Highness Prince Ding and Wang Fei? The two of them led their horses and walked slowly. Suddenly, an old trembling voice came from the side of the road. The two of them looked over and saw a 70-year-old white-haired man in ragged clothes by the side of the road. He was supporting himself with a wooden staff and trembling as he looked at the two of them. Emo Xiuyao looked silently at the old man for a while before asking, "How do you know?" The old man said emotionally, "I heard that His Highness Prince Ding is in his prime but has a head of white hair. And I also heard that Prince Ding's army camp is just a few dozen li away. Prince Wang Fei, I beg you to save the people of the Dechu state." As he spoke, the old man's staff tilted and he knelt on the ground, tears streaming down his face. Not far away, a few villagers heard the old man's words and hurriedly ran over. In a short while they all knelt on the ground, crying. Yi Li looked around. As expected, the people present were either old people in their 60s or 70s or children of a few years old. There were also some women and children. Other than the ignorant children, Everyone had a deep and worried expression on their faces. When they looked at Yi Li and Emo Shuyao, they had a bit of hope. Yi Li bent down to help the old man up. She was also speechless for a while. Tilting her head to look at Emo Shuyao, she saw that he was also silent. Yi Li asked in a light voice, "Elder, are you willing to leave this place?" The old man shook his head and said, "We are already people with one foot in the grave. Where can we go? I only hope that Wang Yi and Wang Fei can chase those thieves out so that they can take revenge for our fellow villagers who died so tragically. So that we, the children who don't know anything yet, can grow up safely and peacefully. Us old people, if we die then we die." Yi Li looked at the sallow complexions of these people and knew how hard their days were. She sighed and said, "I will have people send some food over later. In another 2 months it will be winter. But if it is possible you should move back a little. When the autumn harvest comes, the northern tribe soldiers will definitely come out to steal the food. In a few days the two armies will be at war and this place will not be peaceful." The old man was hesitant. Their village was closest to the front line of the two armies and was often harassed by the northern tribe soldiers. Luckily, the northern tribe soldiers were no longer like when they first entered the pass and killed everyone they saw. But these people were either old and weak or young and ignorant. Where could they go? Emo Shuyao said in a low voice, "About 60 li back there are a few villages. There are not many people left. You can live there. The battle line will not move back. You can live there without worry. Tomorrow I will send people to escort you there." Emo Shuyao's words were equivalent to a promise. No matter what happened at the front line, as long as the Mahist army had a single soldier, they would not retreat a single step. Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed. Tears of joy flowed down their faces as they kowtowed to Yi Li and Emo Shuyao. Yi Li helplessly helped the old man up and pulled up a small child beside him. The child was about 5 or 6 years old. He raised his head and looked at Yi Li without fear. Yi Li smiled at him. The child immediately blushed and grabbed the old man's sleeve to hide behind him. Yi Li thought of Emo Xiaobao, Leng Junhan, Su Jirui and the rest who were in high spirits in the Prince Ding mansion. Then she looked at the small and skinny child in front of her who was wearing old clothes that did not fit him. Because of what they saw at the foot of the mountain, the two did not have the mood to wander around and could only return to the camp together. When they returned to the camp, all the generals came out to welcome them. At this time, other than Zhang Qilan guarding Xiling, General Yuan Pei guarding Feihong Pass, Murong Shin guarding Chujing and Ling Huai far away in Chongqing, all the famous generals of the Mahist army were gathered in the camp. There were more than 10 of them. "Princess Consort, you have pacified the north. I congratulate you." Young Master Feng San was dressed in flamboyant red clothes. He was not as handsome as the generals in their battle robes. But he was elegant and had an extraordinary aura. Yi Li smiled faintly and saluted. "It is all thanks to everyone. Young Master Feng San, you flatter me." Chapter 849. All the generals congratulated Yi Li in unison. They were already very respectful of this Princess Ding. Now that she had pacified the north, no one in the Mahist army dared to doubt Princess Ding's abilities. With Yi Li's return, Emo Shuyao was in a good mood. He dismissed everyone, leaving only Lu Jingxian and the others to discuss matters. Everyone couldn't help but ask about Yi Li's matters in the north. Yi Li did not want to dampen everyone's spirits and could only pick some important matters to talk about. Everyone sighed at Rin Qining's bad luck and the Prince Ding mansion's good luck. As expected, the heavens were on the side of the Prince Ding mansion. On the other hand, they also sighed at Wang Fei's methods and foresight. They may be able to pacify the north, but to take down the north so easily, it could be said to be without shedding a drop of blood. There probably weren't 2 people present who could do it. Hearing Yi Li finish, Emo Shuyao thought for a moment and said, "It's enough to have Ling Huai and Leng Haoyu in Chongqing. Later let's have Hisu come back." Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said, "It seems that this side is a bit troublesome. There are many fierce generals in the army and Hisu has to come back." Lu Jingxian and the others knew that Hisu was one of Yi Li's people and said with a smile, "Wang Fei is right. Hisu has been neglected by the king of the northern tribes these years. It's rare that he hasn't been dispirited and has cultivated a few talents. Right now, the northern tribes has millions of soldiers and many fierce generals. I've heard that General He's ability to lead troops is the best among the young generals. If he can come, it is a good thing." Marquis Nan stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Yes, Wang Fei has many capable people under her command. Right now, among the young generals, General He Su is better. Instead, it's my son who's a good-for-nothing." After saying this, Marquis Nan glared at Fu Zhao as if he expected better from him. Fu Zhao rubbed his nose innocently. It wasn't that he didn't work hard, it was just that this world was full of evildoers. Yi Li laughed and said, "Southern Marquis is exaggerating. Shitzi is a rare talent in both pen and sword. How can He Su compare to him?" He lowered his head and thought for a moment before saying, "That's good too. General Leng Huai is a person of virtue and prestige, and Leng Haoyu has a flexible personality. With them overseeing Chongqing, I'm sure that the areas outside of Redbud Pass will quickly return to their former prosperity. On the other hand, what kind of famous general is there in the northern region barracks that even General Lu is afraid of?" Lu Jingxian said, "In the Northern Militant Army, there is a young general called Helian Ping. He should be a junior of Helian Zhen. However, in terms of using troops, Helian Zhen was probably slightly inferior to him." Currently, the Northern Militant Army had Yelu Yi, Helian Zhen and Helian Ping as well as millions of elite soldiers. That's quite troublesome. Although it was a bit troublesome, Lu Jinxian's face didn't show the slightest hint of annoyance. Instead, he was eager to fight. Since Yelu Hong has already returned to the Northern Militant Army, Yelu Yi is now in charge of the army. I wonder if Yelu Hong will be successful after returning to the Northern Militant Army. If everything goes well, Yelu Yi won't be able to hold on for long. Yi Li pondered. Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows in disdain and said, "If Yelu Hong can't even handle such a small matter, he might as well die. Since Miss Li has also returned, I also want to meet Helian Zhen. I want to see if he's still the same as before." Speaking of Helian Zhen, Mo Xuyao's eyes couldn't help but become a bit more vicious. It wasn't that Helian Zhen was a genius, but that the Prince Ding mansion hadn't suffered a single defeat in over 100 years. However, it just so happened that he had fallen into Helian Zhen's hands. Although it wasn't a battle loss, a loss was still a loss. It had to be said that the battle from over a decade ago was the most humiliating one the Prince Ding mansion had fought in over 100 years. It was also the battle where they suffered the most losses. How could Mo Shuyao not remember Helian Zhen? Not long after Mo Shuyao remembered Helian Zhen also didn't forget Mo Shuyao. That year Helian Zhen was the #1 general of the Northern Militant Army. He was about to defeat the Prince Ding mansion and become the war god of the Northern Militant Army. However, Mo Shuyao, a young man who wasn't even 18 years old, suddenly appeared out of nowhere and burned him until he threw away his armor and fled in defeat. In that battle, the Northern Militant Army didn't invest any less soldiers than now. They were about to achieve a complete victory, but in the end they were almost completely wiped out. Although Mo Shuyao also paid a heavy price, the Northern Militant Army's losses were also extremely heavy. In the Northern Tribes camp, Yelu Yi sat on the main seat, and below him sat a white-bearded old general in his 50s and a muscular young man in his late 20s, exuding a valiant aura. However, he was different from the typical Northern Militant Army soldier. His eyes were calm and sharp, rarely seen in the Northern Militant Army soldiers. These two people were the Northern Militant Army's General Helian Zhen and his adopted son Helian Ping, who had come to reinforce Yelu Yi. Originally, before Mo Shuyao and Helian Zhen arrived, the two armies fought a small battle every 3 days and a big battle every 5 days. When the commander-in-chief arrived, everyone calmed down and became more cautious in their attacks. In this half a month, neither side took the initiative to provoke the other. I've said it before, Ren Qining isn't good enough. We should have found Lei Jinting as an ally from the start. Helian Zhen said in a low voice. Yelu Ye's expression was gloomy as he said coldly, "I really didn't expect Ren Qining to be so incompetent. He was actually forced to commit suicide by a woman in less than 3 months. His entire army was almost wiped out. The reason why we chose him was because of the geography, but also because Lei Jinting is too ambitious and cunning. He is not as easy to control as Ren Qining." Helian Zhen said, "Then what should we do now? The 7th Prince has made a military pledge to the king that he will not return to the Northern Militant Army until he destroys the Mahist army. Now that Princess Ding has pacified the north, soon the Prince Ding mansion will send more troops here. I'm afraid it's too late to join forces with Lei Jinting now." Now Lei Jinting was not without worries. Emo Jingli was also eyeing him covetously in Jiangnan. In Xiling, the Emperor of Xiling was also watching Lei Zhenting at all times, waiting for him to reveal a flaw so that he could seize power in one fell swoop. If Lei Zhenting were to fight to the death with the Prince Ding mansion at this time, it would be hard to say who would win if both sides joined forces. But no matter who won or lost, the unlucky one would be Lei Zhenting himself. Yalu Yi sighed and said, "Fortunately, our military strength is far greater than Emo Xiuyao's. We still have a chance of winning." Helian Ping, who had been sitting silently at the side, raised his head and said, "Prince, you may not be right." Yalu Yi raised his eyebrows and said, "What do you mean?" Helian Ping said, "Although our military strength is far greater than the Mahist armies, but Central was originally the Mahist army's territory. As long as they want to expand their army, I'm afraid they can gather millions of troops in the blink of an eye. Even if they are not as elite as the original Mahist army, they will still be somewhat useful. Moreover, in this general's opinion, Emo Xiuyao is not a person without foresight. It is impossible for him not to know that the Mahist army's military strength is far less than the other countries. Why is it that he has not implemented his conscription at all?" Yalu Yi could not help but frown. He stared seriously at Helian Ping and asked, You mean to say that Emo Xiuyao is hiding his strength?" Helian Ping nodded and said, "That's right. This general believes that the Mahist army's military strength is definitely more than what we know. I'm afraid that Emo Xiuyao has hidden a large number of troops in places that we do not know about, waiting to deal a fatal blow to our army. Your Highness must not lower your guard." Chapter 850. Yalu Yi nodded. He wasn't really a condescending person. When facing Emo Xiuyao, he was willing to be more cautious. Yalu Yi said, "Helian, what do you think?" Helian Ping said, "I plan to test the strength of the Mahist army." Yalu Yi looked at him with interest and said, "How do you plan to test it?" "In the past half-year, our army has fought with the Mahist army dozens of times. I can only say that the Mahist army is indeed worthy of being the iron-blooded army that has shaken the world for more than 200 years. When mentioning the fighting strength of the Mahist army, even Yalu Yi couldn't help but sigh in admiration. The physical strength of the people of the Central Plains was not as good as the nomads. Although many people of the Central Plains practiced internal strength and martial arts, they could fight 1 against 10. But in the end, practicing martial arts required time and not everyone could practice high-level martial arts. So for a long time the fighting strength of the Central Plains was always weaker than the northern tribes. But the Mahist army was clearly an exception. Every soldier of the Mahist army had strength that was completely different from the northern tribes. This made the battle more intense every time the two armies clashed. Helian Ping thought for a moment and said, "Qilin, Qilin." When these words came out, even Yalu Yi and Helian Zhen couldn't help but be moved. Qilin hadn't been an army for a long time, but they had made many outstanding contributions. In many of the great victories of the Mahist army, their shadows could be seen, but very few people in the world had actually seen them. He was like a ghost. Yalu Yi said, "Qilin was created by the Ding King's wife and is also the most mysterious troop of the Mahist army led by the Ding King's wife." Helian Ping wants to challenge the Ding King's wife? Helian Ping raised his eyebrows and said, "Can't I?" Yalu Yi smiled and said, "It's not that you can't. I thought that Helian Ping was arrogant and wanted to directly challenge Emo Xiuyao." Helian Ping said indifferently, "This general will not look down on women, especially when this woman is the imperial consort. Furthermore, I don't know why, but I have a feeling that if we don't get rid of this Qilin, the northern tribes will fall into their hands sooner or later." Yalu Yi trembled slightly, asking, "How do you know?" Helian Ping muttered to himself for a moment before saying, "I don't know either. I just have this feeling." Ever since Qilin appeared, he had always caught the enemy off guard. Every time he attacked, he would always attack the enemy's vital points and never miss. We, the warriors of the northern tribes, may not fear anyone on the battlefield, but it is our weakness to deal with enemies that come and go like ghosts. Yalu Yi nodded in agreement. After dealing with the Mahist army for so long, he naturally knew about this. However, the strengths and weaknesses of the northern tribes were accumulated over thousands of years and could not be changed in a short period of time. How does Helian Ping plan to deal with Qilin? Helian Zhen smiled and said, "Ever since Qilin appeared, Peng'er has been very interested in these people. Therefore we have also trained a group of people to deal with Qilin. Hearing this, Yeluyi was really surprised. He looked at Helian Ping and asked, "Really?" All these years his imperial father had been very displeased with Helian Jin and had even removed his military power. Under such circumstances, how could Yeluyi not be surprised that he was able to train such a group of people? If this war did not happen, this group of people who could kill an invisible people would be perfect to deal with Yelu Hong. Helian Peng's expression did not change as he nodded and said, "That's right. They originally called Qilin a benevolent beast, but it was too weak and lacked some killing intent. This group of people I call them Yizi." Yizi. Although Yeluyi was from the northern tribes as a prince, he naturally had some understanding of the culture of the Central Plains. Yizi, one of the 9 sons of the dragon, looked like a jackal and liked to kill. Although it was called a dragon, it was actually a ferocious beast. This made Yeluyi curious. Helian Ping actually had some understanding of the culture of the Central Plains. "That's right." Helian Jin said loudly, "Back then I was careless and lost to Emo Shuyao, that ignorant brat. If I can't get rid of this humiliation, I won't be able to face the ancestors of the Helian family even if I die. For this day I have waited for more than 10 years. Rest assured, 7th Prince, this time, we will definitely make sure that the Mahist army will never be able to rise again." Yeluyi naturally knew of Helian Jin's hatred towards Emo Shuyao. It could be said that half of Helian Jin's life was spent in the Prince Ding Mansion and also in the Prince Ding Mansion. Half of his life was spent in the military, and his greatest achievement was defeating the Mahist army and killing Emo Shuyao. However, his greatest defeat was also losing to the Mahist army, losing to Emo Shuyao. Nodding, Yeluyi said in a low voice, "Then I will have to trouble Uncle and Helian. I will quietly listen to the good news. What does Helian Ping plan to do?" Helian Ping pondered for a moment and said, "Yili has just returned. She definitely won't be ready to guard against us so quickly. What I mean is, tonight we will attack at night." Yeluyi hesitated for a moment. "Are you confident?" Helian Ping smiled and said, "Rest assured, Your Highness, it's just a test. In that case it's approved." Chapter 851. Late at night outside the Mahist army's camp, a group of agile men dressed in black silently snuck in. Although this was not the main camp of the Mahist army that Prince Ding personally oversaw, the main camp was only 20 or so li away and was closely connected to the main camp. Moreover, this was the place where most of the rations were stored. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was the Mahist army's frontline supply granary, and the tight security was self-evident. However, these people were able to sneak in without alerting anyone, and this was enough to show how outstanding their abilities were. In the quiet camp, other than the patrolling soldiers coming and going, all of the soldiers had already fallen asleep. In the darkness of the night, only the cawing of the night crows could be heard from time to time, making people feel a sense of unease. The leader raised his hand to stop the people behind him from moving forward, and looked around vigilantly. Suddenly he said in a low and hurried voice, "We've been discovered, retreat." The others were also startled, and before they could react, a rain of silver arrows pierced through the night sky. "Retreat." The men in black were all skilled, and almost at the same time they scattered in all directions. The barracks were immediately lit up. A man dressed in black walked out from the darkness and a cold smile appeared on his lips. "Since you've come, don't leave. Chase." Countless black figures streaked across the hidden corners of the camp, chasing in the direction of the fleeing black-clothed men. These men in black did not immediately escape, and instead ran all over the place, and many of them even headed towards the area where the rations were stored. It was clear that they wanted to destroy most of the Mahist army's rations in one fell swoop. It had to be known that before the army moved, the rations would move first. In this era, when two armies fought, other than fighting strength and tactics, they also competed with rations. Without rations, even if you were the strongest soldier in the world, you would only end up starving to death. Their plan was very good, but how could the Mahist army, which had been around for hundreds of years, not have considered this problem? As soon as they entered the storage area, they were surrounded by a group of equally mysterious black-clothed men. Both sides attacked each other without saying a word. Not far away from the camp, Su Qingfeng was standing at the edge of a cliff, dressed in black, looking down at the camp with a gloomy face. Standing next to him were the unrestrained Han Mingxi and the graceful Han Mingyue brothers. Behind them stood a group of men in black who were also eyeing the flickering flames of the camp not far away. What a nice place. Han Mingxi smiled at Su Qingfeng. Originally, he and Han Mingyue had been ordered to escort the provisions over, but they didn't expect to see such a good show. Han Mingyue pondered for a moment before saying, "These people seem to act in a similar way as Qi Lin." Su Qingfeng said proudly, "I'm just copying the wisdom of others. Painting the skin of a tiger is difficult to paint the bones. For the northern tribes to be able to do this, it's not bad. Since they provoked us first, it's not right if we don't teach them a lesson." Men. Commander. A black-clothed man stepped forward and bowed. Su Qingfeng said, "There's a northern tribes camp 60 miles away from here. Why don't you guys go and have some fun?" "Yes, Commander." The black-clothed man replied. With a wave of his hand, he disappeared into the night with the other black-clothed men. The rest of them didn't say anything else and looked down at the camp below. This place looked ordinary, but standing on the cliff, one could take in the entire camp. In this way, no matter how powerful the northern tribes were, they wouldn't be able to escape Qi Lin's eyes. They're retreating. The northern tribes knew that they couldn't succeed, and they were sent here to test the waters. If they could burn the provisions of the Mahist army, it would be a good thing, but if they couldn't, it didn't matter. Seeing that they couldn't gain the upper hand, they immediately prepared to retreat. Su Qingfeng rubbed his chin and laughed. "Since they were sent here to test us, we'll just let one of them go. Kill the rest." Han Mingxi, who was standing by the side, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Letting one of them go was more embarrassing than letting none of them go. It was obvious that he was telling the northern tribes that since they had sent someone to investigate, he would leave one person to report back to them. He was not afraid of them investigating. Originally, he thought that among the brothers of the Su family, Su Qingfeng was the kindest. He didn't expect him to be such a bad person. The northern tribes wanted to escape, so Qi Lin let them go. However, they didn't let them go. Instead, they moved the battlefield outside the camp. There were originally more than 20 black-clothed men, but they were soon split up and fought their own battles. In less than an hour, the brightly lit camp returned to silence. In the darkness, 3 black-clothed men ran frantically in the direction of the northern tribes' camp. In such a moonless night, although there were some stars, it was not enough to illuminate the path ahead. The 3 of them ran through the forest in a panic, not knowing where to go, and actually lost their way. They stopped and looked in the direction they came from. It seemed that no one was chasing them, so they heaved a sigh of relief. One of them couldn't help but say, "I didn't expect these Central Plains people to be so powerful." They were carefully trained by Helian Jun and Helian Ping over the past few years. They were much more powerful than the average northern tribes soldiers. The people of the northern tribes were known for their martial prowess. These soldiers of the Yazi army even looked down on the ordinary soldiers of the northern tribes, let alone the people of the Central Plains who had always been weak. However, they didn't expect the Yazi army to be so powerful that they couldn't even gain an advantage in a one-on-one battle. They were even at a disadvantage. That's because the Central Plains people are cunning and set up an ambush. Another person refused to admit defeat. His skills were above the rest, and he wasn't at a disadvantage when fighting against the Mahist army. It was just that they were outnumbered and had no choice but to escape. Naturally, he refused to admit defeat. The remaining person couldn't help but frown and say, "We seem to be lost. It's better to return to the camp quickly." The other 2 nodded in agreement. They had been running in the forest for more than 2 hours, but they still couldn't find the way out. It was obvious that they were lost in the forest. The elite Yazi army of the northern tribes actually got lost. What a joke. In the forest, a burst of hearty laughter came from the darkness. However, it was erratic and no one could determine the source of the laughter. The 3 of them changed their expressions. "Who is it? How do you know about Yazi?" Yazi was Helian Jin's secret trump card. Not to mention outsiders, even the king of the northern tribes and Yelu Yi didn't know about it beforehand. They didn't expect the other party to expose their identities. The person laughed and said, "How can the Mahist army not know about any barbarian who dares to step into the Central Plains?" "Qi Lin." The 3 of them said in unison. They stared at the void in the darkness with vigilance. "Qi Lin, didn't you want to experience the power of my Qi Lin? Why are you leaving?" The person in the darkness laughed. The leader of the men in black said sternly, "Come out and fight if you have the ability. Do you Central Plains people only know how to sneak around? The man in the darkness laughed coldly and said, I'm just about to teach you a lesson. A black shadow shot out like a ray of light. The three men from the northern tribes didn't even get to see the person's face clearly. The man in the lead only felt a chill on his neck. A cold hand was strangling his neck. With a slight force, the man from the northern tribes made a gurgling sound and fell to the ground lifeless. Chapter 852. The remaining two men from the northern tribes roared angrily and charged at the black figure. The black figure snorted and a cold light flashed. The cold light of the soft sword danced in the night like a dazzling flower. In just a moment another person fell to the ground. The remaining man from the northern tribes was scared out of his wits. As long as one was human, one would be afraid of death. Even though the northern tribes were more courageous than the people of the Central Plains, it did not mean that they were less afraid of death. If it was on the battlefield, the two armies might not care about life and death. However, in the darkness of the night, facing this mysterious black figure and the corpses of two of his comrades lying beside him, the man from the northern tribes, who had been running for more than 2 hours, finally had a mental breakdown. He roared angrily and charged at the black figure without caring about the difference in skill. The black figure laughed coldly and appeared behind the man from the northern tribes. His palm landed on the back of the man's neck. The man from the northern tribes fell to the ground in a daze. The forest regained its peace. The man in black kept his soft sword and turned to walk out of the forest. Outside the forest, Su Qingfeng, Han Mingxi and the rest were already waiting there. Walking out of the dark forest, a handsome face was revealed under the starlight. Who else could it be but Zhuojing? Han Mingxi leaned against a tree and yawned in boredom. Just 3 escape thieves. Is there a need for Princess Ding's most trusted aide to personally deal with them? Making a mountain out of a molehill. Zhuojing ignored Han Mingxi's mockery and said lightly, the princess consort only wants to know how strong these people are. Su Qingfeng asked curiously, how is it? They had watched the battle from beginning to end. Naturally, they could see that these people's strength was not far from Qi Lin's. He was indeed worthy of being trained by Helianjin after spending countless years and countless efforts. Zhuojing smiled. Their skills are not bad. However, they are lacking in other aspects. In Qi Lin's training, individual skills were important. However, it was not absolute. Among the Qilins, there were also some whose skills were only slightly better than ordinary soldiers. However, he had a specialty that no one else could match. Moreover, Qi Lin was good at teamwork. If one was surrounded by them, even if one was a top expert in the world, it would not be easy to escape. Other than that, there were also various skills training sessions. Tonight's incident where the northern tribes got lost in the forest would never happen to Qi Lin. Furthermore, the mental fortitude of these northern tribes members was not as good as the members of Qi Lin. In the past few years, Qi Lin had gradually formed a standardized system under the leadership of Qin Feng and the others. Every officially selected member had emerged from various desperate situations. He would only become stronger when encountering a strong opponent, and he would only become calmer when facing a dangerous situation instead of going crazy for no reason. Su Qingfeng nodded and said, that's good. Let's go back too. Helian Peng and Yelu Yi were sitting in the middle of the big tent, waiting for news. Yelu Ye's sword-like eyebrows furrowed, his heart a little uneasy. Since the start of the battle with the Mahist army, he had always been a little worried about Yi Li's Qi Lin. Although Qi Lin hadn't made any moves, their reputation of never missing a target cast a shadow of uneasiness in his heart. If Helian Peng's Yazi could restrain Qi Lin, he would naturally have less scruples when leading the army into battle. Looking at the sky that was about to brighten, Yelu Yi sighed in disappointment and said, looks like it's not impossible. Helian Peng's face did not show any anxiety and said indifferently, Your Highness does not need to worry, these people's failure is expected. If the Mahist army can't even deal with this small accident, then the Mahist army is too weak. This time I just want to know how strong the Mahist army's Qi Lin is. Hearing Helian Peng's words, Yelu Yi also relaxed. He said, Helian, it's good that you know. Although Yi Li is a woman, she is not as easy to deal with as Mo Xiuyao. Helian, you must be careful. Helian Peng looked at Yelu Yi with some surprise. He was surprised that Yelu Yi valued Yi Li so much. Even if Yelu Yi did not say it, he would definitely not underestimate Yi Li. Yelu Yi smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying, I also only figured it out in the past 2 days. Ren Qining lost to Yi Li. I'm afraid that when Ren Qining first arrived in Glass City, Yi Li had already started scheming. These are all things that Mo Xiuyao and Su Qingchen cannot interfere with. Also, when Yi Li defeated Lei Zhenting in the northwest, many people say it was an accident. However, there is a saying in the Central Plains that when many accidents are stacked together, they are no longer accidents but premeditated. Helian Ping nodded in agreement. Your Highness is right. In the past 2 years, I have also seriously studied the battle where Yi Li defeated Lei Zhenting. It was clearly Yi Li deliberately showing weakness, luring Lei Zhenting's army into the hinterland and cutting off his supplies from the rear. She even gave up Xinyang City to destroy the Xiling army's most elite forces. Lei Zhenting's defeat was not unjust. Princess Ding is a woman, but her foresight, scheming, decisiveness and courage are all perfect. If not for the fact that she is a woman, I'm afraid there would be one more contender for hegemony in the Central Plains. The two of them fell silent. When they thought about the current situation, they could not help but sigh. The Central Plains was truly a land of heroes. If the northern tribes wanted to conquer the Central Plains, the road ahead would be difficult. Reporting to Your Highness General Helian, the men we sent out last night have returned. Someone reported from outside the tent. Yelu Yi stood up and asked, how many came back? The guard outside the tent hesitated for a moment before replying, Your Highness, only one person came back. One person? Not only Yelu Yi but even Helian Peng was shocked. Although they had talked about Yazi's defeat tonight, it could be considered a lesson for his arrogant subordinates. But even Helian Ping did not expect that only one person would come back alive. Originally, he had thought that even if these people could not defeat the Mahist army, they would at least be able to escape. Let him in. Helian Ping said in a low voice. Not long after, a black-clothed man walked in looking disheveled. He knelt in front of Yelu Yi and Helian Ping. This subordinate greets Your Highness, General. Helian Ping frowned and asked, what happened? The black-clothed man recounted what had happened last night. It turned out that this black-clothed man was the last one to be knocked unconscious by Zhuojing in the forest. At that time, Zhuojing did not hit him too hard, so it did not take long for him to win. He stumbled out of the forest, and when he returned to the northern tribe's camp, the sky was already bright. Helian Peng and Yelu Ye's expressions turned even uglier. How was this the last one who had escaped? This last one was obviously the Mahist army deliberately letting him go so that he could report back. When the black-clothed man finished speaking, Helian Peng stood up and slashed his sword across the black-clothed man's neck. The black-clothed man's eyes widened and he fell to the ground, dying with his eyes wide open. He did not die in the hands of the enemy, but in the end he died in the hands of the person who had trained him. Chapter 853. Helian Peng wiped off the blood on his sword and said coldly, since you are the only one left, there is no need to go back. Although he wanted to suppress their arrogance last night, such a crushing defeat was not a lesson for them, it was a complete blow to their morale. If they were allowed to return to Yazi and these things were spread out, it would definitely cause Yazi to have a natural fear of the Mo army and the Qilin, which would be very disadvantageous to the war. There was a saying in the Central Plains that was correct. Ignorance is bliss. Your Highness, General Yi, he sent someone to report that his camp was attacked last night. 2 granaries were burned. The soldier outside hurried in and reported. Yelu Ye's face darkened as he gritted his teeth and said, Qilin. Helian Peng lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, so quick to retaliate as expected of the Mahist army. Yelu Yi said coldly, Helian, I don't care what method you use. You must get rid of Qilin for I as soon as possible. Otherwise they will become a threat to I sooner or later. Compared to the Mahist army, provisions were more important to the northern tribe's army. Even if the Mahist army ran out of provisions, they could still think of ways to get more from other places. The area controlled by the Prince Ding mansion spanned across the original Dechu state and Xiling state. It was not considered small compared to the original Dechu state. Even if it did not include the granaries of Dechu state such as Jiangnan, it was still easy to gather provisions for a few 100,000 soldiers. However, the royal house of the northern tribes was thousands of miles away from Dechu state, and the northern tribes did not produce any provisions. They could only rob the people in the pass. However, when they first entered the pass, they killed more than half of the people in the north. After 2 years, the people in the north could be said to be less than 1 in 10. How could there be so much food for them to rob? Although he had only lost 2 small granaries, it still made Yelu Yi flustered and exasperated, and he flew into a thunderous rage. Helian Peng replied, "Seventh Prince, please rest assured. I hope you won't disappoint Yelu Yi said in a deep voice. In the Mahist army's camp, Yili couldn't help but smile after hearing Zhuojing's report. She said, "This Helian Peng is quite interesting." Mo Shuyao snorted unhappily, "What's the point? I don't have that kind of skill to create those things that only know how to do it, but I don't know how to do it. Hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers have already been trained." There was no concept of special operations in this era. Other than Yi Li, there was no one else who could come up with a unique combat direction, combat theory and training method. In Mo Shuyao's opinion, Helian Peng's so-called Yazi might not even be as good as the original shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion. The most important thing was that Helian Peng didn't have a clear idea of what Yazi was used for. Now it seemed like it was purely to go against Qi Lin. But they were not Qi Lin's match. This meant that Helian Jin and Helian Peng had wasted a lot of effort. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Since Helian Peng has this idea, it's clearly aimed at me. Let me deal with this rising general of the northern tribes." Mo Shuyao thought for a moment before nodding and saying, "That's good. When he Su comes, let him follow you. Also Yun Ting, Qin Yun, you two should follow Wang Fei." Yes, Prince. Yun Ting and Qin Yun stepped out of the crowd and bowed in response. Yun Ting had been brought back by Yi Li from the Mahist army under Yonglin Murong Shin. Qin Yun admired this young Wang Fei very much. Since Mo Shuyao had ordered, the two naturally agreed happily. Yi Li nodded in agreement. The generals below looked at each other and had a deeper understanding of Yi Li's position. He Su was Princess Ding's shadow guard. Now he had 300,000 soldiers in his hands. Compared to the other old generals of the Prince Ding mansion, he was not lacking at all. This time he had followed Princess Ding to pacify the north. Prince still had He Su follow Wang Fei. It was clear that he wanted to give He Su and his soldiers to Wang Fei to control. He would become Princess Ding's trusted soldier. What was the most important thing in this world? Naturally, it was military power. Prince could even share military power with Wang Fei. What else could he not give? Right now, the Prince Ding mansion and the northern tribes were in a full-scale war. The entire battlefield stretched from Fei Hong Pass to the Chu capital. The entire battlefront took up more than half of the Dechu state's northern territory. Naturally, it could not be all around one place. The Mahist army was also divided into left, middle and right. The right army was led by Yi Li and was stationed at Lingjiu Mountain near Fei Hong Pass. The left army was led by Lu Jingxian and was stationed at the city of Brisk, 100 li away from the Chu capital. Mo Shuyao was in the middle army, guarding the Mahist army's middle camp. Therefore, Yi Li had just returned from the north and had to leave again after a few days of rest. If Yi Li was willing, she could stay in the camp with Mo Shuyao. Even if Yi Li did nothing, the Mahist army would not have any complaints about this Wang Fei. But Yi Li did not want to do that. She did not go to the battlefield to gain the Mahist army's approval. She did it because she liked it. Even after a lifetime, the valiance of being born into a military family had never been erased. So everyone in the world felt that Ding Wang Fei was a scholarly and talented woman on the outside, but her actions were more like a descendant of a general. Outside the Mo family army's barracks, Zhuojing, Qin Feng and the others were standing far away. They were looking at the sky and the earth, but they didn't look at their wise and mighty Prince Ding, who looked down on the world. Lin Han looked at the sky and rubbed his nose. He signaled Qin Feng with his eyes. "Are we leaving or not? It's getting dark." Qin Feng rubbed his nose and rolled his eyes. "How would I know?" Zhuojing looked down. "If we can't leave today, we'll leave tomorrow. The prince and Wang Fei are not in a hurry, why should we be?" Feng Zhiyao, who had come to send them off, looked awkwardly at a certain person. He decided that his relationship with Qin Feng and the others was better than his relationship with Princess Ding. Therefore he should send them off. The four looked at each other expressionlessly, but they were all complaining in their hearts. What sin did I commit in my past life to be enslaved by this kind of person for half my life? If outsiders saw this, I would lose all my face. On the other side, Yi Li looked helplessly at a certain person who was looking at her. She sighed, "Shuyao, I should go." Mo Shuyao said with some bitterness, "Li just came back. Can't she stay with me in the army? I'll let Nan Ho go to Lingjie Mountain for a while, okay? Yi Li said softly, we've already agreed on this. You can go back on your words. I will go back on my words. Mo Xiaoyao said confidently, I will order Nan Ho and his son to go to Lingjie Mountain immediately. Yi Li looked at the sky and rolled her eyes. What's with this bad habit of acting like a spoiled child for no reason? She had never seen him act so strangely in front of others. Are you the same age as Mo Xiaobao? Mo Xiaobao doesn't go back on his words like you do. Be good. Quickly defeat the northern tribes and everything will be fine. Mo Xiaoyao hugged her in his arms and said gloomily, Lili lied to me. After defeating the northern tribes, there's still Enchanting and maybe Mo Jingli. Why won't they die? Mo Xiaoyao said gloomily as he buried his eyes in Yi Li's shoulder. Yi Li sighed softly, they will die. Stop messing around. I should go. Chapter 854. After much persuasion, Mo Xiaoyao finally let go of Yi Li. His expression was dark as he watched her get on the horse and leave. Standing at the side, Feng Jiao couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. Prince, it's not the first time Wang Fei has gone out. Is there a need to be so reluctant to part? Most importantly, you can change your image so casually. Not to mention your subordinates, even I who grew up with you find it hard to accept. If you have the time to joke around, why don't you hurry up and kill Yelu Yi for this king? Mo Xiaoyao indifferently glanced at Feng Jiao, snorted coldly and left with a flick of his sleeve. There was no trace of the harmless appearance he had in front of Yi Li. Feng Jiao snorted. He held his chest and helplessly shook his head with a bitter smile. He really valued love over friendship. Even if he was angry, he didn't need to vent it on an innocent passerby like him. If you didn't want Wang Fei to leave, you shouldn't have agreed in the beginning. Feng Jiao cursed silently in his heart, but he could only follow helplessly. Who told him to be so unlucky to have made such a careless friend? Yi Li's group left the Maoist army's camp and quickly rode to the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp. This was not only the closest place to Feihong Pass, but also the closest place to the area controlled by Enchanting. Enchanting had hundreds of thousands of soldiers at the border. Even though West Hill was very busy right now, no one knew if Enchanting would intervene when the Maoist army and the northern tribes were fighting fiercely. The reason why Yi Li was personally stationed here was to prepare for any accidents that might happen. Spirit Vulture Mountain was more than 200 li from the Maoist army's camp. Even if Yi Li's group rode fast, they would only arrive at night. However, there were people guarding the camp and old General Yuan Pei was at Feihong Pass, so Yi Li and the others were not in a hurry. The group of people rode on their horses heading towards Spirit Vulture Mountain at a leisurely pace. When they reached a mountain stream, Qin Feng took the lead and pulled on the reins. The galloping horse was suddenly pulled by the reins. The horse neighed and reared up on its hind legs. It circled around in place for a few steps before coming to a stop. Yi Li and the others who were following behind him naturally stopped as well. Who are you? Please show yourself. Qin Feng said loudly, his voice echoing strangely in the mountain stream. Princess Ding, I've heard a lot about you. Now that I've met you today, you really do live up to your reputation. On the mountain road in front of them, a young man wearing a battle robe and holding a long saber appeared. He had a vigorous aura around him. He laughed heartily as he cupped his hands in greeting towards Yi Li. Yi Li frowned slightly. She patted her horse forward and smiled indifferently. General Helian, nice to meet you. The smile on Helian Peng's face faded slightly. Princess Ding has good eyesight. Yi Li smiled faintly. Who else but General Helian would dare to lead troops to block the road under the control of my Maoist army? Did General Helian also bring your Yizi today? Helian Peng's eyelids twitched when he heard Yi Li's words. Last time he had underestimated the strength of the Maoist army, causing the people he sent out to be completely wiped out. Although he had only sent out a few dozen people to test the waters, it wasn't a glorious battle record to have them completely wiped out. He said in a low voice, this one did indeed bring Yizi here. However, it seems that Princess Consort didn't bring Qilin with her. It's really regrettable. Does Princess Consort think that this place is under the control of the Maoist army and that there isn't the slightest bit of danger to run amok? How would this consort dare to have such thoughts? Even if I'm sitting at home, trouble will still come knocking. However, this consort can't possibly not even leave the house because of this, right? Wouldn't that be like giving up eating for fear of choking? Yi Li said with a smile. Helian Ping looked thoughtfully at the white-clothed woman in front of him. Compared to the women of the northern tribes, the women of the Central Plains didn't look old. If she was in the northern tribes, Yi Li would look like she was only 17 or 18 years old. She was dressed in simple snow-white clothes and her black hair was casually tied up. Her snow-white clothes fluttered in the wind and her hair danced in the wind. She looked like the legendary snow goddess. Since this one is here, I would like to invite Princess Consort to the northern tribes as a guest. I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor. Helian Ping said in a low voice. Hearing this, Qin Feng Zhuojing and the others looked at Helian Ping with even more sinister and fierce gazes. Several people patted their horses and stepped forward to block Yi Li. When Helian Ping saw this, he didn't care. He laughed and waved his hand. A group of black-clothed people appeared on the mountain path. At a glance, there were more than 100 people. Helian Ping looked at Yi Li and said seriously, I hope Princess Consort will do me the honor. Qin Feng laughed coldly and said, You want to take Princess Consort away with just these few people? Your Excellency is too arrogant. Helian Ping raised his eyebrows and glanced at Qin Feng and the others. May I ask who these people are? Naturally, he could tell that the aura of Qin Feng and the others were definitely not as simple as ordinary guards. It was a pity that the intelligence of the northern tribes was not as accurate as the Mahist army. They couldn't even recognize the few people that Yi Li trusted the most. Qin Feng said lightly, General Helian doesn't have to worry about nameless people. However, if General Helian wants to invite Princess Consort over as a guest, you have to ask me first. Helian Ping grinned and said, Is that so? If that's the case, go. The men in black behind him received the order and immediately surrounded Yi Li and the others. Qin Feng, Lin Han and the others charged forward, while Zhuojing retreated to Yi Li's side and didn't make a move. The people that Yi Li brought out, including Qin Feng, Yun Ting, Chen Yun and the others, were only slightly more than 10 people. It was naturally difficult for them to fight against the hundreds of people under Helian Ping. However, these people were the best of the best. They were able to hold their own against so many people and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. Seeing this, even Helian Ping couldn't help but change his expression. He didn't know if these people were specially sent by Mo Shuyao to protect Yi Li or if the Mahist army's fighting strength was so strong. If it was the latter, the northern tribes' army's ending would be worrying. As expected of the elites of the Mahist army, their skills are extraordinary. Helian Ping praised loudly, Princess Consort, no matter how strong your people are, I'm afraid they won't be able to defend against so many people. Why let your subordinates sacrifice themselves? This one is sincerely inviting Princess Consort to the northern tribes as a guest. Why won't Princess Consort give me face? Helian Peng's appearance wasn't considered handsome, but he had a valiant aura that was rarely seen in men of the Central Plains. However, he spoke such cultured words that gave people a strange feeling of incongruity. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, General Helian seems to be very interested in this consort's Qilin. Helian Ping raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, I'm ashamed to say this, but this one is very interested. Princess Consort was able to train such a mysterious troop that is even stronger than the Mahist army's trump card, the Black Cloud Cavalry. How can this one not be impressed? I wanted to ask Princess Consort for advice. Yi Li nodded and said, Since it's like this, then this consort will tell you Qilin. How to use it? Before he could finish his sentence, Yi Li waved her hand and a sharp whistling sound pierced through the air. A green flash shot into the sky and instantly bloomed into green fireworks in the sky. A moment later, a few places not far away also lit up with dark green flames. Chapter 855. Helian Peng's face darkened and he said coldly, Why is there Qilin here? Did Princess Consort predict that I would be waiting here? The two fireworks were obviously the Mahist army responding to Yi Li's summons. The one who would do this was most likely Qilin. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, General, do you really think that I can predict things? Qilin's function is to be everywhere at any time. This is a battlefield. How can they be absent? Helian Ping laughed coldly. Compared to Qilin, his subordinate Yazi was indeed not as good. But it didn't matter. Then Princess Consort, why don't you see if they can save you in time? Helian Ping flew up and pounced towards Yi Li. What was surprising was that Helian Ping was not like the other northern tribes people who only focused on external martial arts. On the contrary, he also practiced internal martial arts of the Central Plains, and it seemed that his internal martial arts were not shallow. At least Yili could not see the depth of his internal martial arts. Zhuojing, who was beside Yili, leaped up and flew towards him. The two of them exchanged blows in the air. In a flash, they had exchanged more than 10 blows before both of them landed on the ground. Zhuojing's face darkened. Helian Peng's martial arts were beyond his expectations. If it was under normal circumstances, he would have a chance of winning if he teamed up with Qin Feng and Lin Han. But now it was impossible. Helian Peng was very confident in his own martial arts. He had fought with the Mahist army several times before and had not met a worthy opponent, even though Mo Xiuyao did not make a move. He did not expect that he would be stopped by an inconspicuous bodyguard. Helian Peng laughed coldly and praised, "Good martial arts." Zhuojing was silent and stared calmly at Helian Peng. Helian Peng snorted and laughed. Unfortunately, it's still not enough. He ignored Zhuojing and once again pounced towards Yili. How could Zhuojing let him succeed? He flew up to block him. On the other side, Yili had also jumped down from her horse's back at the same time. The dagger in her hand flashed and stabbed towards Helian Peng's chest. Helian Peng exclaimed in surprise. He raised his hand to grab Yili's wrist. However, he saw Yili turn her wrist and slash at his wrist. In just a split second, Helian Peng clearly saw the dagger in Yili's hand. It wasn't an ordinary dagger but a tri-chested sharp awl. There was even a blood groove on it. If one was pierced by it, even if they didn't die, they would lose half their life. Helian Peng retreated and said with a smile, "Princess Ding is really ruthless." Although Yili was a woman, she was not afraid of anyone when it came to close combat. It was just that he started cultivating his inner strength too late, so he couldn't achieve great success in it. Now that they were engaged in close combat, there wasn't much use of internal energy. Although Helian Peng was powerful, he was still far from being able to control his inner strength as he wished. Zhuojing naturally wouldn't let Yili fight alone. He flew up with a long sword which was extremely sharp. The sword's aura was overwhelming. The two of them, one from afar and the other from close combat, cooperated well. For a moment, Helian Peng couldn't do anything. Helian Peng knew that if he wanted to capture Yili, he had to get rid of Zhuojing first. However, with Yili here, he couldn't free himself to get rid of Zhuojing. Zhuojing wasn't a good-for-nothing who could be easily defeated by him. Therefore, he could only focus on attacking Yili. As long as he hurt Yili first, he would naturally be free to get rid of Zhuojing. After making up his mind, Helian Peng unsheathed the long sword in his hand. He waved the sword and distanced himself from Yili. The long sword danced vigorously in the air, heading towards Yili. Yili knew that her strength was far inferior to Helian Peng's. She didn't welcome the attack and retreated. Zhuojing moved forward to block Helian Peng's long sword. Yili appeared behind him and stabbed the short sword in her hand towards Helian Peng. Helian Peng had been waiting for this moment. He waved the long sword in his hand with all his strength. Even Zhuojing was shaken off by the strong aura of his sword. However, Yili, who should have been more seriously injured than Zhuojing, seemed to ignore the sword aura and continued to advance towards Helian Peng. Yili's movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the short sword in her hand had stabbed into Helian Peng's body. Helian Peng didn't have time to be surprised at how Yili could resist his strength. His face was already distorted by the intense pain in his body. Zhuojing, who had retreated to one side, waved the long whip in his hand and pulled Yili back. Helian Peng steadied himself. When he saw the wounds on his body, he gasped. Although he had dodged a few of them quickly, the broken sword had only pierced through his arm. However, it could be predicted that this arm would not be able to move for the next 2 to 3 months. If it had really pierced his body, even if it had not hit a vital part, he was afraid that no matter how strong his internal energy was, only death would await him. "Princess consort, you have good skills." Helian Peng stared at Yili, his expression changing. Yili's expression was calm as she said lightly, "General Helian, you flatter me. General's martial arts are extremely rare among the people of the northern tribes." Helian Peng did not hide it. He smiled and said, "That's right. This one's martial arts were indeed taught by an expert from the Central Plains." Helian Peng casually pulled out a long cloth and wrapped the bleeding wound as he spoke with a smile. "It's not just an expert. This consort knows a few experts from the Central Plains. Helian Peng smiled and said, I am ashamed to say this. My master just happened to die at the hands of Prince Ding. Yili frowned slightly and muttered to herself for a moment. Murong Xiong died at the hands of Mo Shuyao. Only Murong Xiong would be able to teach such an expert. Moreover, Helian Peng's martial arts were indeed somewhat similar to Murong Xiong's. Helian Peng smiled but did not say anything. He neither admitted nor denied it. Yili did not mind and said lightly, General Helian, it's best if you quickly return. Bleeding from an arm can still cause death. Although Helian Peng had bandaged the wound on his arm, it clearly could not stop the bleeding. Not long after, the entire cloth was dyed blood red. Helian Peng laughed bitterly and raised his hand to seal a few more acupuncture points. Just as he was about to speak, he saw a few cold lights flash through the forest in the distance. Several feathered arrows shot towards them. Not far from him, several men in black fell to the ground after being hit by the arrows. Helian Peng's expression changed. They came so quickly. Retreat. Chapter 856. When Helian Peng saw that Qilin had arrived and that he was heavily injured, he knew that he would not be able to gain any advantage today. After saying that he was going to retreat, he flew away from the mountain stream, not caring about the lives of the people he brought with him. With the addition of the Qilin, these people were naturally taken care of by everyone without much effort. Qin Feng looked in the direction that Helian Peng left and said regretfully, It's a pity that Helian Peng escaped. Lin Han, who was following behind him, looked at the dead or injured northern tribe soldiers and said, Helian Peng is really ruthless. He sent so many people to their deaths just like that. Helian Peng did not feel any heartache when he threw away the dozens of people from a few days ago and the 100 people today. These people were different from the normal northern tribe soldiers. Every one of them had been specially trained for a long time. Even Helian Peng did not have many such experts. From this, it could be seen that Yi Li and Helian Peng treated their subordinates differently. Qilin had been established for many years and the number of casualties was only slightly more than 100. However, Helian Peng could easily kill more than 100 people with just 1 or 2 moves. It was obvious that Helian Peng did not treat these people as his elite trump cards or even his own subordinates. At most, they were just some high-level cannon fodder. Zhuojing was the closest and saw the situation clearly. He said in a low voice, Even if we did not kill him, Helian Peng would not be able to jump around for a month or 2. Uncle, do you want to send someone? Yi Li shook her head and said, Helian Peng's martial arts are not weak. Even if he is not as good as the prince, he should not be weaker than Ren Qining. Furthermore, he is the general of the northern tribes. Now that he is injured, there should be guards around him. There is no need to send people to their deaths. Let's go to Spirit Vulture Mountain first. Yes, princess. Everyone replied. Some people were left to clean up the battlefield while the rest escorted Yi Li to Spirit Vulture Mountain. The news of Yi Li being blocked by Helian Peng naturally couldn't be hidden from Mo Shuyao. Although Yi Li wasn't injured, Mo Shuyao's expression was extremely ugly. Even Feng Jiao and Han Mingxi, who were usually the most talkative, didn't dare to open their mouths so as to avoid provoking Mo Shuyao. Mo Shuyao snorted with a gloomy expression. He picked up his incineration sword and left the camp. Seeing this, Feng Jiao and the others were stunned. After a long while, Han Mingxi asked somewhat blithely, What is he going to do? Feng Jiao blinked his eyes and joked, You're not going to kill Helian Peng, right? Han Mingyue, who was sitting beside Han Mingxi, nodded and said, He is indeed going to kill Helian Peng. Who knows, Yelu Yi and Helian Zhen might also be there. Although Feng Jiao didn't trust Han Mingyue for a long time, he still had some confidence in his ability and scheming. If it wasn't for Su Zuidi, why would Han Mingyue be like this? Hearing him say this, Feng Jiao immediately jumped up and exclaimed, Is he crazy? That is an army of hundreds of thousands. If he alone can slaughter the entire northern tribe's army, then what is the point of fighting? There is a limit to a person's strength. Even if Mo Shuyao's martial arts were the best in the world, able to fight against 10, 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000, 1 against 10,000, 1 against 10,000? If he wanted to charge into the army camp and kill Helian Peng and Yelu Yi, Feng Jiao only had 2 words for him. You're courting death. After a moment of shock, Feng Jiao finally jumped up and rushed out while shouting, Emo Shuyao, I owe you in my past life. Men. Gather the men. In the large tent, only Han Mingxi and Han Mingyue, the two brothers, were left. Han Mingxi looked at Han Mingyue and asked in disbelief, Big brother, does Emo Shuyao really plan to kill Helian Ping? Even if he wanted to kill him, there was no need to charge into the northern tribe's camp. He could find an opportunity to wait until Helian Ping was alone or out of the camp. With Emo Shuyao's martial arts he could kill several Helian Pings. Han Mingyue smiled bitterly and said, How could Prince Ding not think of what you can think of? Han Mingxi didn't understand, then why is he doing this? After today, as long as Emo Shuyao doesn't die, I'm afraid that no one in this world will dare to have designs on Yi Li. Han Mingyue sighed. He had once thought that Emo Shuyao was deeply in love with Su Zuidi, and even secretly thought that Emo Shuyao didn't understand love. Only now did he understand that it wasn't that Emo Shuyao didn't understand love, it was just that he hadn't met the right person. What Emo Shuyao did for Yi Li, Han Mingyue admitted that he couldn't do it. Reaching out to pat his somewhat absent-minded brother, Han Mingyue turned and walked out. Inside the tent, Han Mingxi was silent for a long time. Finally, he smiled bitterly and a trace of relief flashed across his face. What Emo Shuyao could do he would never be able to do. It wasn't about ability, it was about temperament. He would never be able to do such a thing for a person even if he loved her. This day could be said to be an unforgettable day for all the Northern Tribe's soldiers. Of course, that was if they had eternal life. Because the two armies didn't engage in battle these few days, the Northern Tribe's camp had a rare moment of peace. However, it was precisely in this type of calm that the soldiers guarding the entrance to the camp watched as a silver-haired man dressed in snow-white clothes drifted over like a white cloud. Before the soldiers at the door could react to this sudden scene, they only felt a light on their necks. The man in white's cold, scarlet eyes was the last thing they saw in this world. Emo Shuyao barged into the camp. Taking advantage of the fact that the Northern Tribe soldiers had yet to react, he rushed towards the general's tent. His qinggong was extremely high, and along the way the sword qi of the incineration sword scattered, causing countless casualties. Even the unlucky ones who became his stepping stones were shaken to death by the force of his footsteps. Instantly the camp was in chaos. Countless soldiers rushed towards Emo Shuyao. The soldiers who reacted quickly shot arrows at him, but how could normal arrows hit Emo Shuyao? Furthermore, it was fine if he was in the air, but once he landed on the ground, it was hard to say if the arrows would hit Emo Shuyao or their own men. In a moment the white-robed figure flashed in and out of the camp. Everywhere he went, blood flowed like a river. No one was lucky enough to survive the incineration sword. Every time he swung his sword, blood would flow. With such power, even the Northern Tribe soldiers who were known for their bravery couldn't help but feel terrified. They were afraid that if they were careless they would die without a doubt. With such a huge commotion in the camp, how could Yelu Yi, who was sitting in the commander's tent, not know? Yelu Yi was furious that Helian Ping had returned with injuries, but when he heard the commotion outside the camp, he couldn't help but be enraged. Just then the soldiers outside panicked and reported that someone had barged into the camp. Yelu Yi laughed coldly. I would like to see who dares to barge into the Northern Tribe's camp. The moment he brought Helian Jin and Helian Ping out, he saw Emo Shuyao, dressed in white and holding a sword, walking over. That dull ancient sword was glowing with a bloody light, its killing intent soaring to the heavens. Emo Shuyao? Yelu Yi was shocked and angry. He couldn't understand why this fiend would come to the Northern Tribe's camp at this time. Could it be that Emo Shuyao suddenly felt that as long as he killed him he would be able to resolve this battle? Chapter 857. Anyone with a little experience would know that a war between countries was not something that could be resolved with the death of one or two commanders. Moreover, how difficult was it to assassinate the commander of an army? Even if Emo Shuyao killed him, how could Yelu Yi guarantee that he would be able to leave alive? Emo Shuyao, who was in the midst of killing, also saw Yelu Yi and the other two. With a cold smile he waved his sword and charged towards Yelu Yi. Looking at the blood-colored sword, Yelu Yi's expression changed. Sword of incineration? Beside him Helian Jin's face had already turned black. If Emo Shuyao managed to escape after charging into the Northern Tribe's camp alone, the Northern Tribes would be in deep trouble. With a cold snort, Helian Jin brandished the long saber in his hand and charged towards Emo Shuyao. Yelu Yi had the same idea as Helian Jin. Seeing Helianjin make a move, he also charged forward without hesitation. Since Emo Xiao had come here himself, if they could kill him, it would be a good thing for the northern tribes. More importantly, if they could kill Emo Xiao, their status in the royal house of the northern tribes could be said to be unshakable. Emo Xiao, you've got guts, you're really arrogant, Yu Yi said coldly. Seeing the two attacking, Emo Xiao did not reply, only smiling coldly. The sword in his hand cut through the air like a ray of light, emitting a cold sword aura. Helian Peng was already injured, but at this time he stood to the side and watched. When he saw Helianjin and Yilu Yi fighting Emo Xiao, he knew that the two of them had no chance of winning. Emo Xiao's martial arts were too weak compared to the two of them. Not to mention competing, the two of them did not even have the qualifications to be mentioned in the same breath as him. Lowering his head to look at the wound on his arm, he thought of the beautiful white-clothed girl who looked like a snow mountain saintess. A trace of coldness flashed through Helian Peng's eyes. He raised his hand to summon the guard beside him and whispered a few words. The guard nodded and turned to leave. Watching Helianjin and Yilu Yi struggling under his sword, Emo Xiao revealed a mocking smile. He turned his gaze to Helianjin and swung his sword without hesitation. This sword strike did not have the slightest intention of showing any mercy. When Helianjin saw the earth-shattering energy, he knew that it was not something he could withstand. But Emo Xiao gave up on Yilu Yi and only targeted him. He had nowhere to hide. He could only use all his strength to raise his saber to block Emo Xiao's sword. With a loud bang, the long saber that was made of fine iron and weighed over 100 kilograms shattered into pieces. The incineration sword in Emo Xiao's hand did not slow down in the slightest as it continued to slash towards Helianjin's head. Helianjin was a famous general of the northern tribes. 18 years ago he had been defeated by Emo Xiao. 18 years later he had finally regrouped with great difficulty and wanted to make a comeback. But before he could achieve anything, he was about to become a ghost under Emo Xiao's sword. Seeing Helianjin's suddenly widened eyes filled with fear and shock, Emo Xiao's eyes flashed with a cold and bloodthirsty smile. Die. Bang, it seemed very slow, but in reality, it happened in the blink of an eye. The other saber blocked Emo Xiao's thunderous sword strike. Helianjin was also grabbed by Yilu Yi and pulled to the side. Although they avoided death, everyone present was still in a state of shock. They saw Helian Peng holding a large saber that glowed with a faint golden light. But at this time the saber had already been broken into two halves. Helian Peng's hand holding the saber was trembling uncontrollably. Even the wound on his other arm that was originally bandaged was once again frozen and cracked. It was clear that in order to save Helianjin, he had used all his strength to block the attack. The surging internal energy in his body had actually caused his wound to reopen. Emo Xiao lowered his eyes, his expression indifferent as he looked at the incineration sword in his hand. After a while he raised his head to look at Helian Peng and said, "Good martial arts. Murong Xiong's disciple?" If Helian Peng did not say it, Yili would not have been able to see through Helian Peng's background. But Emo Xiao had only exchanged blows with Helian Peng once, and he had clearly seen through his martial arts. He sneered. It seems that killing Murong Xiong at that time was not an injustice. Helian Peng was clearly not interested in the fact that Emo Xiao was his enemy who had killed his master. He gripped the short saber in his hand and said in a low voice, "Not as good as Prince Ding." "What does Prince Ding mean by today's actions?" "What do I mean?" Emo Xiao's smile was somewhat strange as he looked at him and said, "You guys don't know what I mean." Yilu Yi let go of Helianjin's hand and stood beside Helian Peng, saying in a low voice, "Emo Xiao, don't think that just because your martial arts are strong that I am afraid of you. This prince doesn't believe that you alone can do anything to this prince in the midst of an army of 10,000. Emo Xiao sneered and said, "If you don't know, then I'll tell you. Anyone who dares to have any ideas about Li will all die." The incineration sword released a dangerous brilliance. Emo Xiao casually waved it, and the flags in the camp not far away fell to the ground. The muscles at the corner of Helian Peng's eyes twitched. He casually wiped off the trace of blood from the corner of his lips and sneered. "I would like to see just how formidable Prince Ding is." With a wave of his hand, countless black-clothed men surged out from every corner of the camp and charged towards Emo Xiao. These people were all personally trained by Helian Peng, and their skills were not too far off from Qi Lin. The northern tribespeople were naturally bloodthirsty. At this time the entire camp was being slaughtered by Mo Xiuyao and blood flowed like a river. This aroused the killing intent in their hearts. One by one they charged towards Mo Xiuyao without hesitation. They were truly unafraid of death. Mo Xiuyao let out a long whistle, and his white-clothed figure turned into a white ray of light as he shot towards the crowd. Everywhere he went, blood splattered everywhere and countless broken limbs were left behind. Although Yazi had temporarily trapped Mo Xiuyao, the expressions of Helianjin, Yelu Yi and the others, who were watching the battle from the side, were even more unsightly. Helianjin had already lost a lot of blood and just now he had suffered internal injuries from Mo Xiuyao. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with gloominess. Although Helian Ping didn't cherish these specially trained subordinates as much as Yi Li did, these people were still different from ordinary soldiers. Even Helian Ping only had a little over 1,000 people under his command. Previously, because of Yi Li, he had lost over 100 people. At the very least, he had managed to find out some information about Yi Li. But now, in the blink of an eye, close to 100 people had been killed by Mo Xiuyao. How could Helian Peng's expression not be ugly? Helianjin said with a cold expression, "No matter what, we cannot let Mo Xiuyao leave this place today." The threat that Mo Xiuyao gave him was too great. If it was said that Mo Xiuyao, who was still a teenager 18 years ago, made him feel that his failure was only because he was too careless and unreconciled, then today's meeting completely overturned Helianjin's thoughts. The current Mo Xiuyao was definitely not someone he could deal with. Just now he had only been a hair's breadth away from death. Even 18 years ago he had not felt such a feeling of death. Since he could not defeat Mo Xiuyao, then he had to kill him by hook or by crook. The northern tribe soldiers who were watching from the side were also shocked by the bloody scene. The current scene was even more impactful than on the battlefield. On the battlefield, everyone was fighting with their lives on the line. No matter how desperate the situation was, no one had the time to care about it. But now they could only watch on helplessly as this could be called a one-sided massacre. Those black-clothed men who were usually very powerful in the eyes of these ordinary soldiers, were like wooden chickens and pottery dogs in front of this white-clothed, white-haired man, unable to withstand a single blow. The snowy rain fell on Mo Xiuyao's snow-white clothes, adding a hint of killing intent to his cold and bloodthirsty handsome face. It was as if he was a blood-soaked Azura from hell. Chapter 858. Kill this devil. Finally, someone couldn't help but break down. Without caring about anything else, he raised his weapon and charged at the blood-stained white figure. Unfortunately, before he could even touch a corner of the other's clothes, he was cut in half by the incoming sword chi. "Archers, shoot!" Yelu Yi ordered in a deep voice. These black-clothed Yazi might be able to trap Mo Xiuyao, or even exhaust his internal energy to kill him. But that was under the premise that Mo Xiuyao didn't want to escape. More importantly, even if Mo Xiuyao didn't escape, who knew how many Yazi would have to die to exhaust Mo Xiuyao's internal energy? Perhaps it would take 2,000 or 3,000. They didn't have that many people. Once the last black-clothed man died, it would be their turn to test the incineration sword's edge. In an instant, arrows rained down like rain. Although most of the arrows were aimed at Mo Xiuyao, many of the black-clothed men were too close to Mo Xiuyao. Moreover, Mo Xiuyao's figure was erratic. In fact, he was shooting indiscriminately. Mo Xiuyao sneered. He grabbed a black-clothed man and casually tossed him aside. In an instant he turned into a hedgehog. Turning around, he swung his sword. The arrows in the distance seemed to be blocked by something and they all flew back to the person who originally shot them. "Yelu Yi, you're courting death," Mo Xiuyao said in a deep voice. "Protect the seventh prince." Everyone was shocked. Dozens of people rushed to Yelu Yi's front and back to block Mo Xiuyao's furious sword strike. Of the dozens of people who blocked the sword, only 3 or 4 remained to protect Yelu Yi. Fortunately, Mo Xiuyao's attention was quickly drawn back by the arrows coming from behind. Otherwise, Yelu Yi's life would be in danger. Although he managed to keep his life, Yelu Yi's complexion was pale. Looking at Helianjin, who had just escaped a calamity like him, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of a bleak and bitter smile. He didn't dare to carelessly issue orders again. Mo Xiuyao's martial arts, just how high is it? Looking at the white-haired man in white, Yelu Yi couldn't help muttering to himself. Hellion Peng clutched his wound and leaned against the entrance of the large tent. Not only did the bleeding wound cause his face to turn pale, it also caused him to feel faint. The current Mo Shuyao can probably be considered the #1 expert under the heavens. More than 2 years ago he had to join forces with Lei Jinting and Ling Taihan to kill my master. If it was now, I'm afraid even if my master was at his peak he might not be a match for him. Some people were called geniuses. They didn't seem to need to train hard or sharpen their skills. They were born to stand higher than others. Even the heavens couldn't help but be jealous of such a genius. And Mo Shuyao was obviously such a person. Just as the entire northern militant camp was trembling in fear from Mo Xuyao's massacre, a commotion came from outside the main gate. 2 figures, one red and one white, flew in from outside, like 2 shadows pouncing in the direction of Mo Shuyao. Mo Shuyao. Feng Jiao's voice was flustered and exasperated. It was fortunate that he had spoken first. Otherwise he would most likely have suffered 2 swords like those black-clothed men of the northern militant camp who had been ravaged by Mo Shuyao. Mo Shuyao kept his sword and glanced unhappily at Feng Jiao and Han Mingyue who had landed in front of him. He said, "Who asked you to be so nosy?" Han Mingyue smiled but didn't say anything. He was only following Feng Jiao to help. He also knew that Mo Shuyao wouldn't appreciate his help, so he didn't say anything. Feng Jiao was so angry that his hair stood on end. He grabbed Mo Shuyao and said, "Why aren't you leaving? Do you want to die here?" Under normal circumstances, Feng Jiao definitely wouldn't be able to catch Mo Shuyao. However, after Mo Xuyao's massacre, the anger and brutality in his heart had dissipated. That he felt slightly tired. Even if Mo Shuyao was the #1 martial arts expert in the world, the number of northern militant fighters who had died at his hands today was no less than 100. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be completely exhausted. He only wanted to vent his anger on the northern militant and give them a warning. He didn't plan to throw his life away. Even if Feng Jiao and Han Mingyue didn't come, he would have to leave in a while. Now that he was being held back by Feng Jiao, he didn't stay any longer. He glanced disdainfully at Yelu Yi and said, "Let's go." He took the lead and used his qinggong to rush out of the gate. Mo Shuyao? Yelu Yi was enraged by that look of disdain. He roared, "Kill him." Han Mingyue, who was at the end of the group, sighed helplessly. She swung her sword to deflect the arrow that was shot at her and leaped up to fly outside. Feng Jiao dared to charge into the northern militant camp with Han Mingyue. Naturally, he wouldn't be unprepared. The 3 of them were still chased by the northern militant army after they left the camp. But after chasing for less than 2 to 3 li, they saw the Mahist army's Black Cloud cavalry waiting for them. Mo Shuyao and the other 2 landed in the midst of the Mahist army and turned to face the northern militant army. The 2 armies faced each other. Mo Shuyao, "One day I will make you die a horrible death." Looking at Mo Shuyao, who was sitting on a horse, his white clothes stained with blood, Yelu Yi roared. Mo Shuyao snorted and pointed his sword at Yelu Yi. He laughed coldly, "This is what I wanted to say to you. Today I will teach you a lesson. If there is a next time, I will definitely take your dog life. Return to camp." Watching Mo Shuyao leisurely leave under the escort of the Mo family troops, Yelu Yi's face turned ashen. "Go back." Yelu Yi and the rest returned to the camp. Mo Xuyao's ruckus today had caused the northern militant camp to lose more than 200 ordinary soldiers. Hellion Jun and Hellion Peng's specially trained Yazi had more than 400 to 500 casualties. The incineration sword could cut through metal like mud. Not to mention the vital parts, even the sword's aura would cause severe injuries. Those injured soldiers were no different from dead. They would never be able to return to the battlefield again. This was not the worst thing. After all, compared to the millions of soldiers, the loss of a few hundred soldiers was negligible. But the psychological trauma this massacre had on the northern militant soldiers was the most serious thing. With just Prince Ding alone, he was able to move about unhindered amidst the several 100,000 soldiers' campsite, killing until blood flowed like a river. This caused the northern militant soldiers, who were already worried about the reputation of the Mahist army, to be even more fearful of Prince Ding. 7th Highness. In the tent, Hellion Ping knelt on the ground. Due to his heavy injuries, he had not been able to rest properly. This caused his resolute face to look haggard and weak. Yelu Yi stared coldly at him and said, "What do you have to say?" Today's incident was caused by He Yanping going to deal with Yi Li. Yelu Yi originally did not agree with He Yanping's actions. It was not that he did not want to deal with Yi Li, but Yi Li was Princess Ding. There would definitely be countless experts protecting her. The chances of success were too low. What's more, the fate of those who had once attacked Yi Li was still there. As expected, He Yanping's plan had failed. Instead, it attracted Mo Xiaoyao's crazy revenge. This time what they lost was not the lives of the few hundred soldiers, but the morale of the northern militant army. In such a situation they would not be able to recover without a few shocking victories. He Yanping was silent. He lowered his head and said, "I have nothing to say. Please punish me." You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.